They say the world sees the truth long before the people living it do. For Ethan Liu and Adrian Shin, the realization didn't come during a high-stakes action sequence or under the glare of a premiere spotlight. It happened in the quiet gaps between the lines. It began with a friendship special variety show that forced the world to look closer. While fans made compilation videos of their shared brain and instinctive habits, Ethan began to ask himself a dangerous question. Have I always looked for him first? The realization that he had fallen for his best friend led to a week of agonizing distance as Ethan tried to protect their bond by withdrawing from it. But Adrian had been carrying his own silence for years. He watched Ethan pull away and realized he couldn't face a future where they weren't side by side. In a late-night conversation in the Shipyard District, away from managers, cameras, and scripts, the silence finally broke. They confessed that the partnership everyone admired was built on a love neither had dared to name. They chose each other, discovered that their inner circle had been waiting for them to catch up for years, and prepared to face a new reality where they were no longer just co-stars, but partners in every sense of the word. Welcome to the fiction verse. If you love deep, immersive audio novels, please take a quick second to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this independent universe grow. Now, put on your favorite headphones, dim the lights, and let today's journey begin. The arrivals terminal at the international airport always had a specific kind of energy. A restless hum of voices in a dozen different languages, the rhythmic clacking of suitcases over tiled floors, and the occasional sharp chime of the overhead paging system. It was nearly midnight, and the fluorescent lights felt a little too bright for Ethan's tired eyes. He was leaning against a pillar near the exit B gate, his baseball cap pulled low and a black face mask hiding most of his features. He didn't need to check the flight board. He knew the plane had landed 22 minutes ago. He'd been tracking its progress across the ocean for the last 10 hours. "You're pacing," a voice said in his ear. Ethan turned to see Sophia standing beside him. She looked as sharp as ever, even at midnight, though she was absent-mindedly twisting a loose thread on her coat. "I'm not pacing, Sophia. I'm just stretching my legs," Ethan said, his voice a muffled rumble behind his mask. "Right, stretching. In a 3-foot circle for 20 minutes. Sophia teased, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Relax, Ethan. Marcus messaged me. They just cleared customs. He'll be out in 5 minutes. Ethan nodded, shoving his hands into the pockets of his hoodie. 3 months. It was the longest they'd been apart since they got together. They'd talked every night, shared every meal through a screen, and traded 1,000 photos of different skies. But the distance had started to feel real. Ethan needed the real thing. Then the sliding glass doors hissed open. A stream of travelers began to filter out. Businessmen in crumpled suits, families carrying duty-free bags, and backpackers looking for the nearest taxi. In the middle of the crowd, Ethan spotted him. Adrian looked different. The Tokyo sun had left a faint warmth on his skin, and his hair was a bit longer, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. He was dressed for comfort, an oversized sweater and dark trousers, and he was carrying a small travel bag. Marcus was a few steps behind him, pushing a luggage cart and looking remarkably alert for someone who had just crossed 10 time zones. Adrian's eyes were scanning the crowd, looking a bit glazed from the flight. But the second they landed on the tall figure by the pillar, the exhaustion vanished. A slow, genuine smile broke across his face, the kind that made Ethan's heart do a slow, heavy roll in his chest. Adrian didn't run. He walked with a steady, purposeful stride, stopping just inches away from Ethan. "You're actually here," Adrian whispered, his voice morning rough and intimate. "I told you I would be," Ethan replied. He didn't care about the people watching or the cameras that might be hiding in the distance. He reached out and pulled Adrian into a firm, grounding hug. Adrian leaned into him, resting his forehead against Ethan's shoulder for a long, quiet second. He smelled of airplane air and that familiar, woody cologne that Ethan had missed more than he realized. "Welcome home, Star," Ethan murmured. "I'm home," Adrian breathed. They broke apart, but Ethan kept his hand on Adrian's arm as they walked toward the parking lot. Marcus and Sophia followed a few paces behind, talking in hushed tones about the upcoming press releases and the schedule for the next week. The drive is going to be quiet, at least, Ethan said as they reached the car. The city's mostly asleep. Good, Adrian sighed, sliding into the passenger seat. I think I've reached my limit for human noise today. I just want a bed that doesn't move and a conversation that isn't about a script. As Ethan pulled out of the airport lot, the city lights began to blur past in a familiar sequence. He reached across the center console and took Adrian's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, the grip tight and certain. How was the last take? Ethan asked, glancing over. Brutal, Adrian laughed softly. The director wanted the perfect sunset, so we spent 4 hours waiting for a 10-second shot. I think I know every blade of grass in that field by name now. Well, you can forget the grass for a while. Noah sent about 50 messages today. He's already planning a reunion dinner at his place. He says he's perfected his recipe for spicy hot pot. Adrian groaned, though he was smiling. Tell him I'm not ready for Noah-level chaos yet. I need at least 48 hours of Lou-level quiet first. I'll let him know, Ethan grinned. They reached Ethan's apartment 20 minutes later. It was a larger place now, a quiet, sun-filled spot in a residential neighborhood that Sophia had helped him find last year. Adrian walked inside and dropped his bag by the door, looking around the living room. Nothing had changed. The books were still stacked on the coffee table. The plants were still thriving, mostly thanks to a reminder app Adrian had set up for Ethan. And the scent of cedar and clean laundry filled the air. I missed this couch, Adrian said, flopping onto the cushions with a tired sigh. I missed you on it, Ethan replied, walking into the kitchen to grab some water. They spent the next hour just settling in. Adrian unpacked his toiletries with a practiced ease, moving around the space like he'd never left. There was no awkwardness, no readjustment period. They had already built a life together. The 3 months apart had been nothing more than a long take. As they eventually headed toward the bedroom, Adrian paused by the window, looking out at the city skyline. It's a good dream, isn't it, Ethan? Adrian asked softly. Ethan came up behind him, resting his chin on Adrian's shoulder. What is this? The quiet. The fact that I don't have to check my schedule before I say goodnight to you. Ethan squeezed his arms around Adrian's waist. It's the best one I've ever had. They stood there for a long time, two people who had spent their lives in the center of the frame, finally finding the peace that only existed off camera. The world was still out there, the fame, the projects, the noise, but tonight it was just the two of them. The first morning back didn't start with a director's shout or the beep of a production timer. It started with the pale, winter sun creeping through the gap in the curtains and the rhythmic, soft breathing of someone asleep beside him. Ethan woke up slowly, enjoying the weight of the duvet and the warmth of the room. He stayed still for a few minutes, just watching Adrian. The superstar was currently a mess of tangled sheets and messy hair, his face looking younger and more relaxed than it ever did in a high-definition close-up. He slid out of bed as quietly as he could, heading toward the kitchen. It was 7 a.m., late for him but perfect for a day with no filming. He started the coffee, the familiar aroma filling the apartment, and began making breakfast. He knew exactly what Adrian wanted after months of hotel food in Tokyo. Simple, homemade rice congee, and a few small plates of pickled vegetables. He was halfway through the prep when he heard the soft scuff of feet on the floorboards. Adrian wandered into the kitchen, wearing one of Ethan's old, oversized hoodies that was a size too big for him. He looked half asleep, his eyes squinting at the morning light. Without saying a word, he walked straight to Ethan, leaning his forehead against Ethan's back while Ethan continued to stir the pot. Coffee's almost ready, Ethan said, his voice a low, morning rumble. Smells like home, Adrian murmured into Ethan's sweatshirt. Ethan turned around in the small circle of space, handing Adrian a mug. Adrian took a sip, letting out a long, appreciative sigh. He then reached out and stole a piece of cucumber from the cutting board, popping it into his mouth. Hey, that's for the congee, Ethan teased. I'm conducting a quality check. Adrian countered, leaning against the counter. It's been 3 months. I had to make sure your chopping skills hadn't gotten rusty. They ate breakfast at the small wooden table by the window. They didn't talk about the industry or the award nominations that were starting to leak. They talked about the neighbor's cat that had started sitting on their balcony, and the fact that Ethan had finally learned how to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom. I have a full day of doing absolutely nothing planned, Adrian announced, setting his bowl aside. No phones, no emails, no Marcus telling me about a brand briefing. Just the couch, the cat, and maybe a movie I'm not in. Sounds ambitious, Ethan joked. But I think we need to go to the store. The fridge is looking a bit pathetic. The grocery trip was an exercise in nondescript living. They both wore caps and masks, blending into the mid-morning crowd of suburban shoppers. To the woman debating between 2 types of laundry detergent, they were just 2 friends arguing about which brand of cereal had less sugar. We don't need the giant bag of rice, Ethan, Adrian whispered, pointing at the shelf. There are only 2 of us. I cook a lot, Adrian, and Noah usually stops by twice a week to eat his weight in leftovers. The giant bag is a strategic investment. Adrian rolled his eyes but stayed quiet as Ethan hauled the heavy bag into the cart. They ran into a few familiar faces near the checkout, a costume designer from a previous project and a camera assistant. Lou, Shen, you guys back already? The designer asked, offering a warm smile. Just got back yesterday, Adrian said, his voice polite but easy. You 2 look good, the designer noted, her eyes moving between them. Rest looks good on you. Usually, when I see actors on their off days, they look like they've been through a blender. We're keeping it simple these days, Ethan replied, nodding a goodbye. By the time they got back to the apartment and put the groceries away, it was early afternoon. The apartment felt warm and lived in, the silence a comfortable blanket rather than a heavy weight. Ethan found Adrian in the living room, looking through a box of souvenirs he'd brought back from Tokyo. He had small, carefully chosen gifts for everyone. A leather-bound notebook for Ethan, a vintage silk scarf for Sophia, a specific brand of pipe tobacco for Jonathan, and a ridiculous, oversized beer mug for Noah. I thought Marcus was going to make me pay for an extra seat on the plane just for the souvenirs, Adrian said, handing Ethan the notebook. Ethan ran his fingers over the cover. It was high-quality, dark brown leather, the edges hand-stitched. It's beautiful, Adrian. Thank you. I figured you'd need a place to write down all the truths you find in your next roles. Adrian smiled. Ethan pulled Adrian closer, his expression going quiet and thoughtful. He looked around the room, the luggage, the groceries, the coffee mugs on the table. What? Adrian asked, noticing the look. Nothing. I was just thinking. 3 months ago, I was counting down the hours until you walked through that gate. Now you're here, and the apartment doesn't feel empty anymore. Adrian reached up, brushing a stray hair from Ethan's forehead. I'm not going anywhere for a while, Ethan. No gates, no flights, just here. The day ended with them sitting together on the sofa, the winter sun fading into a soft, gray twilight. They were just themselves again. Not the superstar and the rising star, but 2 men who had learned that the greatest dream wasn't found in a script. It was found in the quiet, ordinary space they had built between them. And for now, that was exactly where they wanted to stay. The doing absolutely nothing phase lasted exactly 48 hours. By Thursday morning, the silence of the apartment was broken by the simultaneous buzzing of 2 phones on the bedside table. Ethan groaned, reaching out blindly for his device. It's Sophia. She's using all caps. That's never a good sign for my sleep schedule. Adrian sat up, rubbing his eyes, his own phone glowing with a series of missed calls from Marcus. Marcus is sending me PDF attachments. I think the quiet life just got its eviction notice. An hour later, they were sitting in the conference room at the agency. The atmosphere was professional but warm, a meeting of partners rather than just managers and talent. Sophia was sitting at the head of the table, a stack of 4 folders in front of her. Marcus was beside her, his tablet open to a high-density filming calendar. Welcome back to reality, boys, Sophia said, offering a shark-like grin. I hope you enjoyed the kanji and the couch, Because the industry has been busy while you were away. What's the damage, Sophia? Ethan asked, sitting back. It's not damage, Ethan. It's momentum, Sophia corrected, sliding the first folder toward him. You've received 3 direct offers for leading roles. Real leads. No supporting tags. No ensemble titles. These scripts are written for you. Ethan picked up the top folder. The title was The Weight of Salt. It was a grounded, character-driven drama about a man returning to his coastal hometown. He could feel the quality of the project just from the names attached to the production. And for Adrian, Marcus took over, sliding 2 folders across the table. We have the final offer for the international collaboration we discussed in Tokyo. It's a high-budget project, but the character is complex. It's not a hero role. It's a man who has to live with the consequences of being wrong. Adrian looked at the folders, his expression thoughtful. Complex is good. I'm a bit tired of being the perfect gentleman for a while. We know, Marcus nodded. That's why we've been selective. The conversation moved through the logistics, schedules, commute times, and promotional obligations. Ethan noticed a shift in the way Sophia and Marcus were talking. In the early days, they were fighters trying to claw out a space for their actors. Now, they were strategists managing a legacy. You guys have reached a level where you don't have to chase anymore, Sophia said, her voice turning unusually serious. You have the credibility to say no. You have the respect of the directors. The only thing left to decide is what kind of story you want to tell next. That evening, back at the apartment, the living room was transformed into a temporary script library. Folders were spread out across the floor, pages marked with highlighters and sticky notes. Which one are you leaning toward? Adrian asked, looking up from a heavy thriller script. Ethan was sitting on the floor, leaning against the coffee table. He was holding The Weight of Salt. This one, he said softly. It's not the biggest production, and the salary is about half of the other offers. But the character, I understand him, Adrian. I know why he's quiet. I know why he's afraid to go home. Adrian smiled, a look of genuine pride in his eyes. Then that's the one. Don't even look at the other folders. And you? Ethan asked. Adrian picked up the folders Marcus had given him. He looked at them for a long time before setting them aside. I think I'm going to pass on the international heist for now. Ethan looked surprised. Really? Marcus said that was the biggest contract of the year. It is, Adrian admitted, stretching his legs out. But if I take it, I'll be back on a plane in 2 weeks. I'll be in hotels for another 6 months. I'll be a name on a marketing sheet. He reached out, taking Ethan's hand. I've spent 13 years building a career, Ethan. I think I'd like to spend some time building a life instead. I want to take a smaller project here in the city. Something that lets me sleep in my own bed. Our bed. Ethan felt a surge of warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. Are you sure? Marcus isn't going to like that. Marcus will survive, Adrian laughed. He's been through worse. Besides, he's already starting to like the quiet Adrian. It's less paperwork. They sat in the middle of their new chapters, surrounded by the scripts that represented their professional success. But for the first time in years, the scripts weren't the most important things in the room. Ethan realized then that the biggest success wasn't reaching the top tier of the industry. It was having the confidence to step back from it. It was knowing that his worth wasn't measured by his box office ranking, but by the person sitting across from him on a messy living room floor. So, Ethan said, picking up a pen, separate roads for a while? Professionally, maybe. Adrian agreed, leaning in to rest his head on Ethan's shoulder. But they both lead back here. And that's the only thing that matters. The day ended with a quiet sense of anticipation. This was the beginning, not a struggle for survival but a journey of choice. As Ethan wrote the first character note in his new notebook, he knew that he wasn't just an actor playing a role anymore. He was the architect of his own story, and for the first time in his life, he was perfectly happy with the way the plot was unfolding. The transition from a shared set to separate productions felt like trying to walk after spinning in circles. Everything was technically the same, but the balance was just slightly off. Ethan stood in the center of a coastal pier, the salt air tangling his hair and the sound of waves crashing against the pilings providing a rhythmic backdrop to the morning's work. He was filming The Weight of Salt. The crew was familiar. Many of them were veterans from Shadowline who had specifically requested to work on Lou's next one. "Looking good, Ethan," the director called out. "Let's run the sequence where you're looking out at the horizon. You're not waiting for someone specific. You're just waiting for a life you haven't lived yet." Ethan nodded, taking his mark. He looked out at the gray, churning water. It was easy to channel that feeling. Even though he was happy, even though his career was peaking, there was a phantom limb sensation on his left side where Adrian usually stood. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Adrian was in a high-tech studio, surrounded by green screens and motion capture markers. His new project was a tight, cerebral mystery. It was a smaller set, quiet and focused, exactly what he had asked Marcus for. "Adrian, remember?" His director noted through the headset. "You're a man who trusts no one. Every person in this room is a potential threat." Adrian adjusted his glasses, his expression turning cold and calculating. It was a role that required him to be isolated. But the moment the director shouted, "Cut," Adrian's hand went straight to his pocket. He didn't check for messages from the agency. He checked for a single name. "Ethan, 10:15 a.m. Just finished the pier scene. The wind is a menace today. Hope the studio air conditioning is being kind to you." Adrian smiled, a quick flicker of warmth that his character would never show. He typed back with one hand while a stylist touched up his hair. "Adrian, 10:17 a.m. I'd trade the AC for some salt air right now. This green screen is starting to make me see spots. Don't forget your jacket, the forecast said the temperature is dropping." The day was a marathon of stolen minutes. 10 minutes in the makeup chair. 5 minutes during a lighting reset. A lunch break that felt like a tactical maneuver. "You're checking that phone like it's a heart monitor," Marcus noted during the afternoon break, handing Adrian a bottle of water. "Just keeping track of the weather, Marcus," Adrian said smoothly. "Right, the weather. In a soundstage with no windows," Marcus deadpanned. "Look, your schedule and Ethan's actually overlap for an hour tonight. If you wrap by 6, you can catch him before he heads to his night shoot rehearsal." Adrian sat up straighter. "Really? Don't get too excited. It's exactly 60 minutes, including travel." The stolen hour happened in a quiet, nondescript cafe halfway between their two sets. Ethan arrived first, still smelling faintly of salt and diesel from the pier. When Adrian walked in, he didn't look like a superstar. He looked like a guy who had been staring at a wall for 10 hours. They didn't go for a grand romantic greeting. They just sat in a booth at the back, their knees bumping under the small table. "You have a smudge of green paint on your ear," Ethan noted, reaching out to rub it away with his thumb. "Occupational hazard," Adrian sighed, leaning into the touch. "How was the ocean?" "Aggressive. I think I swallowed about a gallon of spray during take 4. But the footage looks real. Director Min is happy." "Good," Adrian smiled. "I'm glad. I missed the morning coffee today. The machine in the studio is broken and Marcus thinks herbal tea is a substitute for caffeine." "He's just looking after your blood pressure," Ethan joked. They spent the hour talking about the tiny, unglamorous details of their day. The way the light hit a specific lens, a funny typo in the script, the fact that the catering crew had run out of napkins. To an outsider, it would have been the most boring conversation in the world. To them, it was the only hour of the day that felt like they were actually awake. When the hour ended, the mood shifted. The lead actor masks had to go back on. "I have to head back for the ADR session," Ethan said, standing up. "And I have another 3 hours of being a paranoid genius," Adrian added. They walked to the parking lot together. Before they reached their separate cars, Adrian stopped, looking at Ethan under the dim streetlights. "It's weird, isn't it?" Adrian asked. "Being on different sets?" "It is," Ethan admitted. "But it makes me realize that the work is just the background noise now. This is the main theme." He squeezed Adrian's hand once, a firm, grounding pressure, before stepping away. That night, one arrived home at 9 p.m. The other walked through the door at midnight. Neither woke the other, but as Ethan finally climbed into bed, he felt the familiar, steady warmth of Adrian already there. He didn't need to say a word. The comfort of knowing they were under the same roof again was enough to make the 16-hour day feel like a small price to pay. Success in the industry usually meant the end of weekends. Saturdays and Sundays were just labels for days with slightly different filming blocks. But after 3 weeks of relentless separate schedules, the universe, or perhaps a very coordinated effort by Sophia and Marcus, granted them an unexpected miracle. A shared free afternoon. Sophia had called Ethan on Friday evening. The weather cover for the pier isn't holding up. The director called a halt for tomorrow. You're free until Sunday morning. And before you ask, yes, Adrian is off too. Marcus cleared his schedule for a brand strategy day that doesn't actually exist. Ethan had laughed. Thanks, Sophia. I owe you. You owe me a relaxed performance on Monday. Get some sleep, Ethan. The morning was slow and golden. They didn't set an alarm. They woke up when the sun finally got high enough to hit the bed, and they spent 2 hours just talking. No scripts in sight. Want to go out? Ethan asked, leaning on his elbow. Like actually out? Not for a meeting. Adrian smiled, stretching like a cat. Anywhere. As long as I don't have to wear a suit. They decided on a nostalgia tour. No luxury restaurants or private clubs. They dressed in their most comfortable, lived-in clothes and headed into the heart of the city. They started at a massive second-hand bookstore they used to visit back when they were still trying to figure each other out. The aisles were narrow, smelling of old paper and dust. Remember this? Adrian whispered, pulling a worn copy of a classic play from the shelf. You spent an hour trying to convince me that the subtext of the second act was about a missing cat. It was about the cat, Adrian. The cat was a metaphor for lost innocence. Ethan argued, a grin playing on his lips. It was just a cat, Lou. They wandered through the city, walking beside the river where the winter wind was sharp but refreshing. They stopped at a newly opened cafe that didn't have any celebrity clientele, and they returned to the small park where they'd had their first official date. The conversation was effortless. They talked about the last 3 years not as a timeline of career milestones, but as a map of their lives. Remember your first audition for Shadowline? Adrian asked as they sat on a bench watching the joggers pass by. I watched you through the monitor and thought, this guy is either going to be the best thing that ever happened to this movie, or he's going to make me look like an amateur. I was just trying not to trip over the cables, Ethan admitted. You did a lot more than that. You changed the way I look at the work, Ethan. You made me realize that I'd been performing for so long that I'd forgotten how to just be. Ethan looked at him, seeing the genuine sincerity in Adrian's eyes. We did that for each other, I think. You gave me the space to be seen. I just gave you someone to stand next to. As the afternoon light began to fade, turning the sky a soft, hazy pink, both of their phones buzzed in their pockets. Ethan pulled his out. A message from Sophia about a revised call sheet. Adrian checked his. A notification from Marcus about an interview request from an international magazine. In the past, they would have answered immediately. The industry demanded instant responses. Every second of silence was a lost opportunity. Ethan looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Ethan. Without saying a word, they both reached into their pockets. Ethan slid the silent toggle on his device. Adrian did the same. They put the phones away and didn't look at them again. They simply stood up and kept walking, their hands finding each other naturally. That single, unscripted action said more than any dramatic promise. For one afternoon, they weren't the assets of an agency or the faces of a franchise. They were just two people who had decided that the most important thing in their lives wasn't the next role. It was the person walking beside them. That evening, as they finally headed home, the city noise seemed a little quieter. The pressure of the separate sets and the demanding schedules was still there, waiting for them on Monday. But as Ethan looked at Adrian, he realized the foundation was finally solid. The dream wasn't something they were chasing anymore. They were finally living in it. Tomorrow's going to be busy, Ethan said as they reached the apartment. Adrian leaned his head against Ethan's shoulder. Let it be busy. As long as it ends here, I don't mind the noise. Ethan smiled, turning the key in the lock. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just looking for the next mark. He was exactly where he wanted to be. The view from Sophia's office window hadn't changed much over the last few years, but the way Ethan sat in the chair across from her certainly had. Gone was the nervous energy of a man waiting for his first real shot. In its place was a quiet, settled confidence. Sophia wasn't looking at a laptop today. Instead, she had 3 slim folders laid out on the mahogany desk like a hand of winning cards. Outside, the city was humming with the mid-morning rush, but the office was a pocket of calm. "I'm not here to ask you to pick one today," Sophia said, leaning back and crossing her arms. She looked at Ethan with the kind of pride usually reserved for family. "You're still in the middle of the weight of salt, and I know your head is buried in the coastal fog of that character. But I wanted you to see these. These are the offers for the after." Ethan picked up the top folder, flipping through the first few pages. He noticed something immediately. The cover letters weren't addressed to his agency as a general inquiry. They were personal notes from directors. "They aren't just looking for an actor who can do his own stunts anymore," Sophia noted, her voice warm. "Few years ago, you and I were sitting here trying to find a way to convince people to just look at your tape. We were fighting for 5 minutes of their time. Now, these producers are the ones trying to convince you. They're pitching to you, Ethan. Every one of these was written with you specifically in mind." Ethan ran his thumb over the edge of the paper. It was a strange feeling, the luxury of saying no. "It feels like a different industry," he admitted. "It's not the industry that changed, Lou. It's your place in it," Sophia smiled. "You aren't the stunt guy Discovery anymore. You're the actor people build their entire production around." Across the city, in a quiet rehearsal studio, Marcus was having a remarkably similar conversation with Adrian. Marcus was leaning against a ballet bar, watching Adrian go over some blocking for his current project. When Adrian finished, Marcus tossed him a towel and a stack of 3 thick binders. "The spring slate is looking heavy," Marcus said, his tone dry but with an underlying edge of respect. "We've got a traditional blockbuster from Studio Red, another franchise reboot, and a very lucrative international offer for a thriller in London." Adrian wiped his face, glancing at the binders with a hint of a sigh. "The usual suspects, then?" "Not exactly," Marcus corrected, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "I went through the contract writers this morning. Usually, they want you because your face sells tickets in 4 different continents. They want the Adrian Shin brand. But look at the notes from the directors on these 3. Marcus tapped the middle binder. "They don't care about the fashion campaigns or the perfect gentleman image. They're asking for the actor you became after Shadowline. They're looking for the range you showed when you weren't trying to be an icon. For the first time in your career, Adrian, they aren't hiring the star. They're hiring the craftsman." Adrian paused, the towel draped over his shoulder. He looked at the scripts, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. That's actually the best news you've given me all week, Marcus." That evening, the apartment was filled with the smell of simple home-cooked food. Ethan and Adrian were sitting at the dining table, the city lights shimmering in the harbor outside their window. The folders and binders from their managers were piled on the end of the table, but neither of them was rushing to open them. They weren't discussing salaries or filming locations. Instead, the conversation had turned inward. "I found a note in my old acting book today," Ethan said, leaning his chin on his hand. "From 5 years ago. I'd written down that my ultimate goal was to be famous enough that I wouldn't have to worry about my rent." Adrian chuckled, reaching across the table to squeeze Ethan's hand. "And now I realized I haven't thought about the rent in 2 years," Ethan said thoughtfully. "Now I just want to make films I'm actually proud of. I want to look at a script and know that even if nobody watches it, the story was worth the effort of telling it." Adrian nodded, his expression going soft. "I feel the same. For a long time, my success was measured by how many people were screaming at the gate. But the best part of my day now is just being here. Knowing that I've earned the right to choose a project because it moves me, not because it keeps me at the top of a chart." While they were talking, the first wave of entertainment editorials for the new season began to hit the web. Ethan's phone buzzed with a notification from a respected film journal. The headline read, "Beyond the Partnership. Why Ethan Liu is the most essential solo actor of the year." Another article from a rival site noted, "Adrian Shun's rebirth. How the icon traded the spotlight for the script." In the past, headlines like these might have created a ripple of insecurity or a sense of competition. The industry loved to pit actors against each other, especially when they were as close as Ethan and Adrian. But as they scrolled through the pieces together, the only thing they felt was a deep, mutual pride. "They're finally seeing you, Liu," Adrian said, his voice full of warmth. "They're seeing us," Ethan corrected. "Even if we aren't in the same frame." They stayed up late into the night, not reading the scripts, but just enjoying the quiet certainty of their new reality. They had started this journey as a shadow and a star, just hoping to survive the meat grinder of the industry together. But as they eventually turned off the lights, they realized they had discovered something much rarer than fame. They had proven that they could succeed separately, growing their own legacies and leading their own worlds without ever growing apart. The roads were different now, but they still led back to the same home. And as the city settled into a peaceful sleep, Ethan and Adrian were ready to take the next step. Not as a duo, but as two individuals who were finally strong enough to stand alone, and even stronger because they didn't have to. The production of The Weight of Salt was a grueling, quiet affair. It was being filmed on a remote stretch of coastline where the wind never seemed to stop howling, and the catering was mostly lukewarm tea and soggy sandwiches. Ethan had been on set for 6 weeks, and he had quickly realized that being the number one on the call sheet was about more than just delivering lines. He was the emotional thermometer for the entire crew. If he was tired, the crew felt it. If he was frustrated, the energy on set soured. He stood by the water's edge, waiting for the camera crew to reset a difficult tracking shot. A younger actor, a boy named Toby who was playing Ethan's younger brother, was sitting on a rock nearby, looking pale and nervous. Toby had been struggling with a scene where he had to confront Ethan about their family's past. "Director says I'm being too loud," Toby whispered when Ethan sat down beside him. "He says I'm acting the anger instead of feeling it. I don't know how to make it smaller without making it disappear." Ethan looked out at the waves, remembering himself 10 years ago. The boy who thought acting was about volume and impact. "Don't think about the anger, Toby," Ethan said, his voice quiet enough to be heard over the wind. "Think about the disappointment. You aren't mad because he's a bad brother. You're mad because you expected him to be better. Disappointment is quiet, is heavy. If you play the weight, the audience will feel the anger." Toby nodded slowly. "The weight. Okay, I can try that." The next take was a revelation. Toby delivered the lines with a hollow, crushing sincerity that made the director stop breathing for a second. When the scene ended, the crew stayed silent, the highest compliment they could give. Across town, Adrian was facing his own version of leadership. His set was a high-pressure environment with a legendary director who had no patience for delays. During a technical glitch with the lighting rig, the director had started to lose his cool, snapping at the junior techs. Adrian didn't shout back. He didn't demand a break. He simply walked over to the director, leaned against the monitor desk, and started talking about a specific lighting choice in an old film they both admired. Within 5 minutes, the director had calmed down, the techs felt less like they were under a microscope, and the work resumed with a new sense of focus. "You sound just like Marcus," the director joked later, after a successful take. Adrian laughed. "I've had a good teacher, Jonathan, but honestly, I just want to get the work done so I can go home." That evening, the two of them finally collapsed onto their sofa. The apartment was dimly lit, the only sound the distant hum of the city. They were both exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally drained by the responsibility of carrying their respective productions. "Toby did a great job today," Ethan said, his eyes closed. "I think he's going to be a big name in a few years. He just needed someone to tell him it was okay to be quiet." "I saved a lighting tech's job today," Adrian added, resting his head on Ethan's chest. "I think the director was about to let him go, but I managed to distract him with a talk about 1950s cinematography. They sat in the silence for a long time, not needing to fill the space with industry gossip or career plans. This was the part of success they hadn't anticipated, the realization that they had become the anchors for others. It's heavier than it looks, isn't it? Adrian asked softly. Being the one everyone looks at? It is, Ethan agreed, his hand absent-mindedly stroking Adrian's hair. But it's easier when I know I'm not the only one doing it. I can handle being an anchor all day as long as I can come back here and let someone else hold the line for a while. Adrian looked up, his gray eyes full of a deep, quiet admiration. I'll always hold the line for you, Ethan. The two of them eventually headed to the kitchen to make a late-night meal. They were tired, they were standing on their own feet in a difficult industry, and the pressure was greater than it had ever been. But as they moved around the small space together, sharing the chores and the conversation, it was clear that they weren't alone at all. They were two leaders who had found the one person they never had to lead. And in a world of constant performance, that was the most valuable dream of all. The final stretch of filming for Ethan's coastal drama felt like a slow exhale. The production had moved from the aggressive, crashing waves of the shore to a quiet interior set, a reconstructed lighthouse keeper's cottage built inside a warehouse. The air here was still, smelling of fresh sawdust and the vanilla tobacco Jonathan Sue liked to smoke during long breaks. Ethan was sitting on a wooden bench, leaning against the lighthouse wall, while a lighting technician adjusted a moonlight filter on the overhead rig. A young actress, barely 20 years old, was sitting a few feet away, nervously clutching her script. She had a small role as a local shopkeeper, and she'd been staring at Ethan for 10 minutes like he was a textbook she was trying to memorize. You're going to burn a hole in me if you keep staring like that, Lucy? Ethan said, his voice soft and encouraging. The girl jumped, her face turning bright red. I'm sorry, Mr. Liu. I've watched all your fight scenes. I mean, the ones from the early days, too. My acting teacher uses your precision movement videos to teach us about physical presence. Ethan felt that familiar, humble warmth in his chest. I'm glad they're useful. But you don't need to call me Mr. Liu. Ethan is fine. We're working together, aren't we? Right? Ethan? She whispered, a small, awestruck smile appearing. It's just you and Adrian Shin, you're like the legends of my class. Everyone wants to have a partnership like yours. Ethan looked at his hands, thinking about how far he had come. He wasn't the guy hiding in the harness anymore. He was the one the next generation was looking at to find their way. It was a responsibility that felt heavier than any stunt rig he'd ever worn. Across town, Adrian was experiencing the same shift. His production had become a hub for industry scouts. Because Adrian was being so selective about his roles, every project he touched was now seen as a quality guarantee. Producers were willing to wait months just for a window in his schedule. I had to turn down 2 international festivals today, Marcus said as he joined Adrian in the makeup trailer. They wanted the duo for a keynote panel. They offered a private jet and a week in a 5-star villa. Adrian didn't even look up from the book he was reading. I'm not a duo for hire, Marcus. And I'm not a keynote speaker. I'm an actor. If the festival is about the film, I'll go. If it's about the brand, tell them I'm busy. Marcus let out a short, surprised laugh. You really have changed. The old Adrian would have taken the villa just to have a quiet place to hide. I have a quiet place to hide now, Adrian said, a small, private smile touching his lips. I don't need to fly across the world to find it. But with the success came a new level of visibility. Leaving the studio had become a tactical operation. After wrapping his final scene at the pier, Ethan headed to a nearby soundstage to complete a short ADR and pickup session. As Ethan walked toward the exit of his soundstage that evening, he saw a group of about 50 people gathered behind the barricades. They weren't just fans. There were professional photographers mixed in, their long lenses pointed at the door like weapons. Ethan pulled his cap lower, but the moment he stepped into the light, the shouting started. Ethan, give us a look. Lou, is it true you and Adrian are looking at a house together? Ethan, over here. Just one shot for the magazine. He moved quickly, offering polite nods but never stopping. It was a strange, suffocating feeling, being recognized not for the truth of his performance, but for the curiosity of his private life. That night, Ethan and Adrian sat on their balcony, watching the city lights. They were both holding cups of tea, the silence between them a necessary shield against the noise of the day. "I had to go through the staff exit today," Adrian admitted, his voice a bit weary. "Someone leaked the filming schedule." Marcus was furious. "They were at my gate too," Ethan said. "It's getting louder, isn't it?" "It is," Adrian agreed, reaching over to squeeze Ethan's hand. "But I think that's the trade-off. The more we choose the stories we want to tell, the more the world wants to know the story we're living." Ethan looked at their joined hands. "I don't mind them knowing the story, Adrian. I just don't want them to own it." "They'll never own it," Adrian said firmly, "because they weren't there for the shipyard, and they weren't there for the midnight calls. The best parts of us aren't on film, Lou, and they never will be." As the stars peeked through the city haze, Ethan realized that Adrian was right. The new horizons were vast, and the spotlight was brighter than ever. But as long as they had this quiet balcony and their shared silence, the world could scream as loud as it wanted. They were already home. The set of the mid-budget historical drama was a noisy, disorganized place. It was the kind of production that had enough money to look good, but not enough to run smoothly. Ryan Zhao sat in his folding chair, one that didn't have his name on it, watching a group of extras struggle with their costumes. Ryan was 27 now, but in the harsh, unfiltered light of the studio, he looked older. The effortless, boyish charm that had made him the nation's sweetheart had settled into something more weary and cautious. He still had the face of a star, but his eyes no longer searched for the camera with that hungry, desperate intensity. "Mr. Zhao, we're ready for your close-up," an assistant director said, her voice professional but lacking the reverence he used to receive. "Coming," Ryan said, standing up and brushing a speck of dust from his silk robe. He moved to his mark. He performed the scene well. He was, after all, a talented actor, but he didn't try to steal the spotlight. He didn't demand more takes. He simply did the work he was hired to do and stepped aside. As he stepped away from the camera, Ryan gave the camera operator and the assistant director a quiet nod of thanks before returning to his chair. The industry had a long memory. While Ryan hadn't been blacklisted, the unreliable tag from years ago still followed him. He was the actor you hired when your first choice was busy. He was the one who was reliable enough for a supporting role, but no longer the person you built a franchise around. During a break, Ryan wandered over to the craft services table. He saw a copy of a trade magazine lying on a crate. On the cover were Ethan and Adrian, standing back-to-back on a red carpet, looking like the pinnacle of professional success. Ryan stared at the photo for a long time. A few years ago, this sight would have filled him with a bitter, toxic jealousy. He would have looked for a way to undermine them, a way to reclaim the light he thought belonged to him. But today, the only thing he felt was a dull, heavy sense of realization. He remembered the noodle shop. He remembered the way Ethan used to look at him with such absolute, unshakable trust. He realized now that the most valuable thing he had ever owned wasn't the awards or the contracts. It was that trust. And he had traded it for a temporary seat at a table that didn't even remember his name. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an email from an address he hadn't seen in years. From Ethan Liu. Subject: Meeting? Ryan, I'm going to be near the old academy on Tuesday. I have some time between rehearsals. If you're free, I'd like to talk. Just to catch up. No pressure. Ryan's hand shook slightly as he read the message. He reread it 3 times, looking for a hidden trap or a note of sarcasm. He found none. It was just Ethan. He looked around the noisy set, at the people who saw him as an asset rather than a person. He looked at the magazine cover one last time. Ryan began to type. Tuesday works for me. I'll be there. That evening, as Ryan drove home, he saw a billboard for Ethan's new movie. He didn't look away. He looked at the man on the poster, the man who had survived everything Ryan had thrown at him and had managed to stay whole. Ryan realized then that rebuilding a life wasn't about finding a new spotlight. It was about finding the courage to face the shadows you left behind. For the first time in years, Ryan Zhao wasn't thinking about his next role. He was thinking about a conversation. And as he pulled into his driveway, the air felt just a little bit easier to breathe. The park near the Metropolitan Academy of Dramatic Arts was one of the few places in the city that seemed to ignore the passage of time. The same oak trees dropped the same golden leaves onto the same cracked pavement. Even the sound of a distant rehearsal piano drifting from the open windows of the school felt like a recording from a decade ago. Ethan arrived first. He was dressed in a simple dark coat and a cap, sitting on a bench overlooking the small pond. He looked like any other person enjoying a quiet afternoon, though the steady, calm weight of his presence made a few students pause as they walked past. Ryan arrived 5 minutes later. He walked slowly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He spotted Ethan and stopped for a second, a flicker of the old nervousness crossing his face. Then he squared his shoulders and walked over. "You're early," Ryan said, stopping a few feet away. Ethan looked up, offering a small, neutral smile. "Old habits, Ryan. Sit down." Ryan sat on the far end of the bench. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. They just watched a group of ducks navigate the murky water of the pond. The silence wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of their last confrontation. It was a tentative, careful silence. "I saw the billboard for The Weight of Salt," Ryan finally said, his voice quiet. "The critics are already calling it a masterpiece. Congratulations." "Thanks," Ethan replied. "It was a good project. Hard work, but honest." "Honest." Ryan repeated the word like it was a foreign language. He looked toward the academy building. "I forgot what that felt like for a long time. I spent so long trying to be the person the agency wanted me to be that I forgot who was supposed to be wearing the costume." Ethan looked at him, noticing the lines around Ryan's eyes. "We were both kids, Ryan. We wanted the dream. We just didn't know how much it was going to cost." Ryan let out a short, shaky breath. "I cost you almost 10 years, Ethan. I took your choreography. I took your roles. I took your trust, and I used it to buy myself a career that I ended up hating." He finally turned to look at Ethan, his eyes wet with a sincerity that no camera had ever captured. "I never said it. Not when it mattered. But I'm sorry. Not because I lost the spotlight, but because I lost the only person who actually knew me." Ethan stayed silent for a long time. He thought about the noodle shop, the betrayal, the award night, and the years of being a shadow. He felt the phantom ache in his shoulder and the memory of the withdrawal email. But as he looked at Ryan, not the nation's sweetheart, but the boy who had shared a cup of noodles with him 10 years ago, the resentment didn't flare up. It felt like an old script that he had already finished reading. "I accepted that apology a long time ago, Ryan," Ethan said softly. "Not for you, but for me. I couldn't move forward if I was still carrying the weight of what you did." Ryan nodded, a look of profound relief washing over him. "I didn't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it out loud." They talked for another hour. Not about the industry or the fame, but about their lives. Ryan talked about his younger brother, Lucas, who was now a film student. Ethan talked about the shipyard and the quiet life he was trying to build with Adrian. "Is he good to you?" Ryan asked, looking toward the city skyline. "He is," Ethan replied, a genuine warmth in his voice. "He understands the silence. That's more than I ever hoped for." As the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the park, they both stood up. "So," Ryan said, offering a small, uncertain hand. "Different roads." Ethan took the hand, the grip firm and final. "Different roads, Ryan. But I'm glad we had this conversation." They parted ways without a dramatic farewell. Ryan walked toward the subway, his steps looking lighter than they had in years. Ethan stayed by the pond for a few more minutes, watching the light fade. He realized then that Ryan Zhao was no longer a wound or a rival. He was simply a part of the history that had brought Ethan to this moment. The past was finally where it belonged, behind him. Ethan walked back toward his car, pulling out his phone. He saw a message from Adrian. "Adrian, Dinner is ready, and I'm watering the plants. All of them, including the fake one. Ethan laughed, a warm, relaxed sound that echoed in the quiet park. He didn't look back at the academy or the shadows of the trees. He just tightened the strap of his bag and headed home. The dream was no longer something he had to chase. He was already living it. It started with a blurry photo of a grocery run. It wasn't even a particularly good photo. Just two men in caps and masks standing in the frozen food aisle, debating the merits of different brands of frozen dumplings. But in the world of internet detectives, a blurry photo was more than enough to start a fire. Ethan sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through a thread on a popular forum. The comments were a mix of, "I knew it," and "they're just friends buying dinner." "They've identified my hoodie," Ethan said, looking up as Adrian walked into the room. "Apparently, I've worn this specific shade of gray in 3 different interviews over the last year. They're calling it Hoodiegate." Adrian leaned over Ethan's shoulder, squinting at the screen. He let out a quiet, tired laugh. "I'm more offended that they think I'd pick the generic brand dumplings. We have taste, at least." He sat down beside Ethan, the humor fading from his face. "Sophia and Marcus have been on the phone all morning. The usual no comment is getting harder to sell. People are starting to feel like we're playing a game with them." Ethan set the phone down. He looked around the apartment. The shared books, the shoes by the door, the life they had built in the quiet spaces between filming. "I'm tired of the masks, Adrian. I'm tired of checking the hallway before I hold your hand. I'm tired of feeling like I'm hiding something I'm actually proud of." Adrian stayed silent for a moment, his gray eyes searching Ethan's. If nobody in this industry had a problem with it, if there were no sponsors, no boards, no nation's sweetheart labels, would we still hide? "No," Ethan answered immediately. "I'd have told everyone the day we walked out of that shipyard coffee shop." "Then why are we still doing it?" Adrian asked softly. "We've earned our places. You're one of the most respected actors in the country. I've got enough awards to fill a room. If we aren't safe enough to be honest now, when will we ever be?" The decision didn't happen with a grand speech. It happened with a quiet, mutual realization that the cost of the secret had finally become higher than the cost of the truth. That afternoon, they met their managers separately. Sophia came over to the apartment, looking at Ethan with a sharp, protective gaze. "You're sure about this?" Sophia asked, leaning against the counter. "Once the door is open, you can't close it again. People will look at every scene you film, every interview you give, through a different lens. Some of the bigger brands might get twitchy about the traditional image stuff." "I know the risks, Sophia," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But I can't keep living a double life. I want to be an actor who's known for being honest. How can I do that if I'm lying about the most important part of my day?" Sophia smiled, the proud older sister smile. "I figured you'd say that. Fine. We'll handle the brands. Marcus and I will coordinate a release. But Ethan, tell your parents first. Don't let them find out from a push notification." The family dinner was held at a quiet, private room in a traditional restaurant. Ethan's parents, Michael and Emma, sat on one side, while Adrian's parents, Victor and Claire, sat on the other. The atmosphere was warm, but there was an underlying tension, the kind that comes when everyone knows something big is about to be said. Ethan took a breath, reaching for Adrian's hand under the table. He felt Adrian squeeze back. "Mom, Dad, Mr. and Mrs. Shin," Ethan began. "We wanted to tell you something before it becomes public knowledge. Adrian and we're together, and we're planning to tell the world tomorrow." Michael Liu, the retired firefighter, looked at their joined hands. He didn't look shocked. He just nodded slowly. "I spent 30 years reading people's faces in emergencies, Ethan. I knew you were safe the moment you started bringing this boy around for dinner. If you're happy, I'm happy." Claire Shin, the hospital director, let out a soft, elegant laugh. "Ethan, dear, I've suspected since the premiere of Shadowline. Adrian hasn't looked at a person with that much clarity since he was 5 years old. We were just waiting for you two to realize we weren't going to break the furniture over it." The evening ended with a sense of profound relief. They weren't asking for permission, but having the foundation of their families beneath them made the upcoming storm feel manageable. As they walked to the car that night, Ethan looked at Adrian. "One more night of being just friends? I'm ready for the new script, Lou." Adrian smiled. The morning of the announcement felt like the quiet before a major stunt. The moment where the harness is checked, the mat is in place, and all that's left is the fall. Ethan and Adrian were in their living room, the coffee on the table untouched. Sophia and Marcus were in their respective offices, their teams standing by to manage the digital ripple that was about to spread across the industry. The agency suggested a staged exclusive with a magazine, Marcus said over the speakerphone. They wanted a 6-page spread with high-fashion photos and a struggle narrative. I told them to get lost. "Good," Adrian muttered. "We're going with your plan," Sophia added. "Simple, honest, direct. No filters, no PR spin. We release it on your official accounts at exactly 10 a.m. Ethan looked at the draft they had written together the night before. It wasn't a long statement. It didn't apologize for the timing or ask for privacy. For the last few years, we've shared a story on screen. But the best part of our lives has been the one we've been building off camera. We are together, we are happy, and we wanted to share our truth with the people who have supported us from the beginning. Ethan and Adrian, accompanied by a single, high-quality photo from their nostalgia tour. Just the two of them walking by the river, laughing, their hands linked. At 9:59 a.m., Ethan felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck. He looked at Adrian. "Ready." "Ready," Adrian said. They both hit the button at the same time. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. Ethan's phone began to vibrate so violently it actually skittered across the coffee table. Notifications poured in like a digital landslide. At Movie News, breaking: Adrian Shen and Ethan Liu confirm relationship in social media post. At Industry Insider, the duo is official. The entertainment world reacts to the most significant reveal in a decade. Within minutes, the post dominated every major platform. By 20 minutes, the studio's servers had crashed from the traffic. "Noah just messaged," Ethan said, looking at his screen. He sent a gif of a man screaming into a pillow and said, "Can I finally stop pretending I'm a vault now?" Adrian laughed, the sound shaky but relieved. Marcus says the international sponsors are calling. 2 are evaluating. But the watch brand just sent a bouquet of flowers to the agency. They want to discuss a couple's campaign. The industry reaction was a fascinating mix. As the hours passed, messages from their peers began to surface. Jonathan Su posted a simple photo of the two of them on the shadow line set with a caption that read, "I make movies about truth. I'm glad my actors live by it. Congratulations." Isabella Wu tweeted, "I've been the third wheel for 3 years. I'm just happy I can finally stop lying about who Adrian is dating at parties. Love you both." But while the industry felt warm, the internet was a different story. As they scrolled through the comments, the voices began to clash. There was overwhelming support, but there was also skepticism, confusion, and a small vocal minority of people who felt betrayed by the icon they thought they owned. "Don't read them, Adrian," Ethan said, gently taking the phone from Adrian's hand. "I'm not," Adrian said, though his eyes were still on the screen. I'm looking at how many people think they know us. They're arguing about who liked who first, or if this is just a promotional tactic for the spring project." "Let them argue," Ethan said, pulling Adrian into a hug. "We're in our own living room. We're eating dinner in an hour. And tomorrow we're going to the set without the masks." That evening, as the city buzzed with their names, Ethan and Adrian stayed in. They made a simple meal, talked about anything other than the news, and eventually fell asleep on the sofa. The announcement hadn't changed who they were to each other. It had just stopped the world from being a barrier. As Ethan drifted off, he was relieved that the stunt was finally over. He had hit the mat, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel a single ache. The walk from the parking lot to the studio entrance on Wednesday morning was the longest 100 yards of Ethan's life. He and Adrian walked side by side, no longer maintaining the professional gap. They weren't holding hands, they were still in a workplace after all, but the proximity was a statement in itself. The air felt electric. Every person they passed, from the security guards at the gate to the PAs carrying breakfast trays, seemed to pause for a microsecond longer than usual. Is it just me? Or is everyone breathing quieter? Adrian whispered as they reached the soundstage. They're just waiting to see if we've changed into different people, Ethan replied. The first person they saw inside was Noah. He was standing by the monitors, his phone in one hand and a giant coffee in the other. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. You guys! Noah shouted, loud enough to make a lighting tech jump. He hurried over, his face a mask of exaggerated drama. Do you have any idea what my DMs look like? I've had 5 different tabloid reporters offer me a consulting fee for stories about your first date. I told them I'd only talk if they bought me a boat. Please don't sell our lives for a boat. Noah, Adrian joked. I'm holding out for a yacht. Noah winked. But then his expression softened, becoming genuinely sincere. Seriously, though, I'm proud of you guys. The set feels lighter today, like the smoke finally cleared. But the lightness wasn't universal. As the morning progressed, Ethan began to hear the other voices, the ones that didn't make it into the supportive tweets. During a costume change, he overheard a couple of the junior crew members talking behind a rack of jackets. I just think it's risky, one said. What if the international market pulls out? Ethan was just starting to get overseas offers. Now he'll always be Adrian Shin's partner first and an actor second. He's basically tied his career to a star that's already peaked. And the fans? The other replied. The sweethearts are already organizing a boycott of the spring posters. They feel like Adrian lied to them for years. Ethan stayed behind the rack, his hand tightening around his script. It was the transaction voice, the one that saw every human connection as a calculation of profit and loss. It was the voice he had spent 10 years trying to outrun. Sophia found him a few minutes later. She looked like she was in the middle of a tactical war, her phone buzzing every few seconds. Don't listen to the noise in the hallways, Ethan, Sophia said, her voice firm. The board is nervous because they hate things they can't control. But the directors? I've had 4 calls this morning from people who want to work with you because of the honesty. They're tired of the manufactured idols. They want real men. I'm not worried about the contracts, Sophia, Ethan said. I'm realizing that once the truth is out, it doesn't belong to us anymore. Everyone feels entitled to have a perspective on our relationship. That's the price of the spotlight, Sophia admitted. But look at Adrian. Ethan looked across the stage. Adrian was in the middle of a scene rehearsal. He looked focused, powerful, and entirely unbothered by the whispers. When the scene ended, Adrian caught Ethan's eye and gave a small, private thumbs up. That evening, the two of them sat in the production office with Marcus and Sophia to review the sentiment report. The split is about 70/30ths, Marcus said, scrolling through a chart. Most of the response is positive or neutral. The remaining criticism is coming from the hardcore idol fanbases. The general audience actually thinks it's refreshing. Marcus, Adrian interrupted, leaning forward. Stop looking at the charts. Marcus paused, looking surprised. The only opinion that matters in this room is ours, Adrian said, his voice calm but absolute. We knew it wouldn't be unanimous. We knew some people would be angry, but we didn't do this for the 30% or the 70%. We did it for us. He reached over and took Ethan's hand, resting it on the table in plain view of the managers. The world is going to have its say, Ethan added. But as long as we keep doing the work will eventually be the only thing they have left to talk about. Sophia smiled, closing her laptop. I knew there was a reason I liked you, Lou. All right, let's get back to the work. We have a movie to finish. As they walked out of the studio that night, the crowd at the gate was larger than ever. The flashes were blinding, and the questions were a roar of noise. But as Ethan gripped the steering wheel and Adrian sat beside him, the different voices faded into a dull hum. They were no longer shadows. They were no longer secrets. They were just two people heading home. The following week felt like living inside a wind tunnel. The initial shock of the announcement had passed, but in its place was a relentless, low-frequency hum of public scrutiny that followed Ethan and Adrian everywhere. It wasn't a single event, but a series of small, sharp pressures. A sponsor asking for an image adjustment, a tabloid photographer following their grocery delivery van, or the way a conversation would suddenly drop in volume the moment they walked into a room. Ethan was on the set of The Weight of Salt, standing by the monitor as they prepared for a night shoot. The air was frigid, smelling of damp earth and the gasoline from the heater units. Sophia walked up to him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and fierce determination. She handed him a tablet. One of the major watch brands is hesitating on the renewal for the spring campaign. They're worried the controversy will overshadow the product. Ethan didn't even look at the screen. He just tightened the scarf around his neck. What did you tell them? I told them that if they wanted a mannequin who doesn't have a life, they should hire a robot, Sophia said, her voice sharp. I told them your engagement numbers are the highest they've been in 5 years because people actually trust you now. They're still thinking about it. Ethan looked toward the set, where the crew was silently working. Let them think, Sophia. I'm not going to spend the rest of my career apologizing for being happy. If they walk away, we'll find a brand that isn't afraid of the truth. Sophia's expression softened. She reached out and patted his shoulder. I know. I just wanted you to be aware. The noise is at its peak right now. The peak arrived that evening as they were leaving the studio. A crowd of about 100 people had gathered behind the barricades. There were fans with supportive signs, but there was also a vocal group of protesters from the Sweethearts Club, holding up black and white photos of Adrian with liar written across them. The shouting was a chaotic blur of voices. Adrian, how could you lie to us? Ethan, are you just using him for your career? Adrian's jaw was tight, his gray eyes fixed straight ahead as he walked toward the car. Ethan stayed right beside him, his shoulder brushing Adrian's. He didn't look at the cameras or the posters. He focused on the steady, rhythmic pace of their walk. The moment they were inside the SUV and the doors slammed shut, the noise became a muffled roar. Adrian let out a long, shaky breath, leaning his head back against the leather seat. I'm sorry you have to hear that, Lou, Adrian whispered, his eyes closed. They shouldn't be attacking you. Ethan reached over and took Adrian's hand, his grip firm. They aren't attacking me, Adrian. They're attacking a version of you that they invented in their heads. That version doesn't exist. This does. He squeezed Adrian's hand. We knew this would happen. It's just noise. It'll pass. Will it? Everything passes except the work, Ethan said certainly. And the people who stay. Look at Marcus and Sophia. Look at Noah. Look at our parents. The world is a lot bigger than 100 people behind a fence. That night, instead of checking the news or reading the forums, they decided to unplug completely. They turned off their phones and left them in the kitchen. They spent the evening cooking a complicated meal together, something that required all their focus and left them both covered in flour and laughter. You're doing it wrong, Adrian joked, trying to rescue a piece of dough from Ethan's clumsy hands. It's supposed to be a circle, not a map of a different country. It's an abstract dumpling, star, Ethan countered, grinning. It's about the soul of the filling, not the shape of the wrapper. As they sat at the table later, eating their abstract meal in the quiet of their home, the pressure of the week seemed to vanish. The voices outside were gone, replaced by the comfortable silence of two people who no longer had to explain themselves. Ethan realized then that standing together wasn't about fighting every battle or winning every argument. It was about creating a space where the world's opinion didn't have a vote. And as long as they had that, no storm could ever knock them off their feet. The shift began slowly, like the tide turning in the middle of the night. About 2 weeks after the peak of the backlash, the headlines started to change. It wasn't the scandal anymore. A prominent industry editorial published a piece titled, Why Ethan Liu and Adrian Shun Are the New Standard for Professional Integrity. Ethan was sitting in a makeup chair, preparing for a joint interview with a respected film critic. The vibe on set was noticeably different. The nervous whispers had been replaced by a quiet, respectful curiosity. A knock came on the trailer door. Toby, the young actor who played Ethan's brother in The Weight of Salt, poked his head in. He looked nervous, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Hey, Ethan, do you have a second?" Toby asked. "Always, Toby. Come on in," Ethan said, gesturing to the small sofa. Toby sat down, looking at the floor for a long minute. I wanted to say thank you for what you and Adrian did. Telling the truth, Ethan tilted his head. We just wanted to stop hiding, Toby. We didn't do it to be a statement. I know, Toby said, finally looking up. His eyes were sincere. But for someone like me, just starting out, it was everything. I've been so afraid that if I ever let anyone know the real me, I'd lose my chance. I've been watching you too and seeing that you're still getting leading roles and that people still respect your work. It gave me some air. I think I can stop being so afraid now. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He realized then that their honesty had become a bridge for people he hadn't even met yet. You're a great actor, Toby. The industry needs your talent more than it needs your image. Just keep doing the work. The rest will find its place. The joint interview that afternoon was a departure from their usual promotional talks. The critic, a woman known for her tough questions, didn't ask about their relationship timeline or their wedding plans. She asked about the cost of honesty. People say that in this business you can't be yourself and be a star at the same time, she noted, looking between them. How do you respond to that? Ethan looked at Adrian, who gave him a small nod. I think the word star is the problem, Ethan said quietly. If you see yourself as a light that belongs to everyone else, you'll always be afraid of the dark. But if you see yourself as a person doing a job, an honest job, then the light is yours to share. We didn't want to be icons. We just wanted to be partners who could walk home together. Adrian smiled, adding, We found that the more honest we are, the more people actually connect with our work. They don't want a perfect superstar anymore. They want a human being who understands what they're going through. If our honest hearts make a movie feel more real, then we've done our job. The interview went viral, but for an entirely different reason than before. It wasn't about the shock. It was about the sincerity. That evening, Sophia joined them for a quick debrief. She looked more relaxed than Ethan had seen her in a month. The watch brand just called back, she said, a satisfied smirk on her face. They want to expand the partnership for the spring. They want to do a real live series featuring both of you. They said their social media engagement from the younger demographic has never been higher. Marcus, who was on the speakerphone, let out a rare, genuine chuckle. The board is suddenly very interested in authenticity as a core brand value. I think we've officially moved from risky to visionary in the eyes of the studio. Ethan and Adrian shared a look, a quiet, amused understanding. The industry was still a machine, and it was still driven by profit and image, but for a brief moment they had managed to change the gears. As they walked out to the parking lot, Ethan noticed that the crowd at the gate was smaller, and the posters were different. There was a girl in the front row holding a sign that simply said, "Thank you for being real." Ethan smiled at her as they drove past. He realized that success wasn't about the number of awards or the size of a contract. It was about the lives you quietly changed just by refusing to be anything other than yourself. 6 months passed, and the reveal had moved from the front-page headlines to a settled part of the industry's history. Ethan and Adrian were no longer the scandalous duo. They were simply Ethan and Adrian, respected, established, and increasingly influential. The set of their latest shared project, a psychological thriller, felt different than any Ethan had ever been on. It wasn't just the high budget or the legendary director. It was the atmosphere of the crew. There was a sense of openness, a lack of the usual hierarchical tension that plagued major productions. Ethan was in the equipment tent, helping a young camera assistant adjust the tension on a tripod. "You really don't have to do that, Mr. Liu," the assistant said, though he didn't pull away. "I know," Ethan smiled, "but a loose tripod is a bad take waiting to happen. And please, Just call me Ethan." Sophia walked in, followed by Marcus. The two managers had become a powerhouse team of their own, often coordinating the schedules of half the cast. "The producers for the summer series just sent over the draft," Sophia said, handing Ethan a folder. "They've changed the ending. They said after seeing how well you and Adrian worked together in the rehearsal clips, they want to lean into the partnership angle instead of the rivalry one." Marcus nodded. "It's a shift in the market. People are tired of the lone hero narrative. They want to see teams. They want to see trust. Producers are noticing audiences respond well to that dynamic." Ethan looked through the folder. It was true. The industry was starting to value authenticity over manufactured drama. Producers were looking for actors with genuine chemistry. Agencies were being less restrictive about their talents' private lives, and the perfect gentleman archetype was slowly being replaced by characters with flaws, histories, and real hearts. During a break, Ethan and Adrian were sitting on a set of steps in the middle of a reconstructed city street. They were surrounded by the usual chaos: crew members moving lights, actors rehearsing, PAs shouting into radios. But in the middle of it all, they were just two people talking. A rookie actor, a boy who couldn't have been more than 18, walked over. He looked terrified. "Excuse me, Mr. Shin? Mr. Liu?" Adrian looked up, his gray eyes warm. "Yes. I just wanted to ask, how do you keep the work real when there are so many people watching? I'm having a hard time finding the character when the director is shouting and the lights are so bright." Ethan looked at the boy, remembering himself on the set of Silent City. "Don't look at the lights, kid," Ethan said gently. "And don't listen to the shouting. Look at the person standing across from you. Really look at them. If you can find the truth in their eyes, the character will find you. Acting isn't a performance for the world. It's a conversation between two people. The world just happens to be watching." The rookie actor nodded, a look of profound relief on his face. "A conversation, right? Thank you. Thank you so much." As the boy hurried off, Adrian leaned his shoulder against Ethan's. "You sounded just like Marcus there, Lou. Very wise." Ethan laughed. "I think I'm just getting old, Adrian. I'm starting to care more about the next generation than my own call sheet." "That's a good way to be," Adrian said softly. That evening, as they were packing up, Sophia walked over with a satisfied smile. "One more thing, Ethan. Director Min just called. She's starting a new project in the fall. She wants you for the lead. And she said, if Adrian is free, there's a role for him too. Not because she needs a duo, but because she wants the best actors she knows." Ethan looked at Adrian. Adrian smiled, reaching out to take Ethan's hand in plain view of the remaining crew. "Tell her we'll read the script together tonight," Ethan said. As they walked out of the studio, the air felt different. The story they had changed wasn't the one written in the scripts or the ones printed in the tabloids. It was the industry's own story, the one about what it meant to be successful and what it meant to be real. They weren't just standing in the spotlight anymore. They were the ones deciding where the light should shine. And as Ethan pulled onto the highway, heading home to the life they had built, he understood that the best part of the dream wasn't the end. It was the fact that the story was still being written, and they were finally the ones holding the pen. The news cycle in the entertainment industry is a hungry beast, but eventually, even it gets full. 6 months after Ethan and Adrian had shared their truth with the world, the scandal had finally lost its teeth. The frantic, breathless headlines had been replaced by a settled, almost boring acceptance. Ethan sat in Sophia's office, leaning back in a leather chair that had seen better days. The afternoon sun was warm on his neck, and for the first time in a long while, his phone wasn't vibrating every 30 seconds with a new alert. Sophia was scrolling through a digital industry report, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "You know things have officially calmed down when the most controversial thing written about you this week is that you wore the same pair of sneakers twice in a row," she said, looking over the rim of her lenses. Ethan laughed, a genuine, easy sound. "They were comfortable sneakers, Sophia. I didn't realize there was a quota." "The point is," Sophia said, setting the tablet down, "the public has moved on to the next big mystery. You're just Ethan and Adrian now. Not the reveal, not the controversy. Just two actors who happen to be together. Even the brands have stopped asking for sensitivity briefings before every shoot. Marcus, who was sitting on the edge of Sophia's desk, nodded in agreement. I had a meeting with the studio board yesterday. They didn't even bring up the relationship. They wanted to talk about the international distribution for the winter thriller. It's back to business, boys. The way it should be. Ethan looked out the window at the harbor. He thought about the rainy shipyard, the protesters at the gate, and the nights they'd spent with their phones turned off, wondering if they just ended their careers. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we stayed quiet? Adrian asked later that evening. They were walking home through a quiet residential street, their hands loosely linked. There were no cameras in sight, and the few people they passed only offered polite, recognizing smiles. I think we would have been fine actors, Adrian, Ethan said thoughtfully. But I think we would have been exhausted people. I'd have spent every interview wondering if I was going to slip up. I'd have spent every dinner with you looking over my shoulder. Adrian squeezed his hand. I remember how heavy that silence felt. It was like carrying a prop that nobody was supposed to see, but it weighed 100 pounds. Exactly, Ethan agreed. Honesty didn't make the industry easier. It's still a meat grinder, but it made us stronger. I don't feel like I'm playing a role when the cameras are off anymore. As they reached their apartment building, Ethan noticed a photo of the two of them on a small shelf in the lobby, part of a neighborhood success display. A year ago, that photo would have made him nervous. Today, he just adjusted his bag and kept walking. We made the right choice, Lou, Adrian said as they stepped into the elevator. I know we did, Ethan replied, leaning his shoulder against Adrian's. The day was ending not with a climax, but with a peaceful, steady hum. The battle for their truth had been won, and while the spotlight would always be there, it no longer felt like it was searching for a crack in their armor. It was just light. And as the elevator reached their floor, Ethan Lou realized that the freedom to be himself was the most successful role he'd ever landed. The realization that their lives were no longer fitting into two separate boxes happened on a messy Tuesday morning. Ethan was in his own apartment, frantically searching for a specific black hoodie he needed for a rehearsal. He checked the closet, the laundry basket, and even under the bed. I know I had it on Sunday, Ethan muttered, rummaging through a drawer. He pulled out his phone and messaged Adrian. Ethan, hey, did I leave my black hoodie at your place? The reply came a second later. Adrian, I'm currently wearing it, along with your favorite socks. I thought they were mine. Ethan, your socks are the expensive ones. Adrian, mine are the ones from the 3-pack. Adrian, well, the 3-pack is very comfortable. Also, I found your script for the Min project in my kitchen. And I think your coffee grinder is here too. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, a small, amused smile playing on his lips. They were paying 2 rents, managing 2 sets of utilities, and keeping 2 kitchens stocked. But the reality was that they hadn't spent a night apart in 4 months. His belongings were migrating to Adrian's place, and Adrian's were taking over his shelves. This is getting ridiculous, Ethan said to the empty room. That evening, while they were sitting on the floor of Adrian's living room, surrounded by takeout containers and open scripts, Ethan decided to skip the preamble. We should just get one place, Ethan said, looking up from his page. Adrian paused, a piece of chicken halfway to his mouth. He blinked, his gray eyes turning wide. You want to move in together? Formally. Adrian, I haven't seen my coffee grinder in 3 weeks. My favorite hoodie is currently being used as your pajama top. And I'm pretty sure Sophia has started sending my mail to your address anyway. Adrian set his chopsticks down, a slow, radiant smile spreading across his face. I was waiting for you to say it. I didn't want to push you. I know how much you like your underdog cave. The cave is empty, Adrian. It's just a place where I keep my spare shoes now. The house hunting was a tactical operation handled by Sophia and Marcus. Sophia focused on the feel of the neighborhoods, looking for quiet streets with trees and local bakeries. Marcus focused on the logistics, underground parking, high-end security systems, and proximity to the major sound stages. They looked at 5 apartments in 3 days. Too big, Adrian said about a massive penthouse with floor-to-ceiling glass. I'll feel like I'm in a showroom. Too many mirrors. Ethan noted about a modern loft. I see enough of myself at work. Then they found a spot in a converted industrial building near the old shipyard district. It had high ceilings, exposed brick, and a massive kitchen that looked out over the water. It wasn't superstar fancy, but it felt solid. It felt like a place where you could actually kick off your shoes and forget about the world. This is it, Ethan said, standing in the middle of the empty living room. The news of the move spread through their circle like wildfire. Noah immediately called a team meeting. I am an expert mover, Noah declared, sitting on their new kitchen counter with a bag of chips. I have a system. We label the boxes by color. Red for Ethan's stunt gear, blue for Adrian's fancy stuff, and green for things I can steal. You aren't stealing anything, Noah? Sophia said, swatting his hand away from a box. And you aren't an expert. Last time you helped me move, you broke a lamp and spent 3 hours testing the comfort of my new mattress. Marcus just stood by the door, checking the lock mechanism. The commute to stage 4 is 12 minutes. The security gate has a facial recognition override. It's acceptable. On the day they finally signed the papers, the sun was setting over the harbor, turning the brick walls of their new home a deep, glowing red. The real estate agent handed Ethan a small leather pouch. Ethan pulled out the 2 silver keys. He looked at them for a long moment, feeling the weight of the metal. For 10 years, he'd carried the key to a small, lonely apartment that felt like a waiting room. This was different. He handed 1 key to Adrian. 1 key, Ethan said softly. Adrian took it, his fingers brushing Ethan's. 1 home. They stood in the empty living room as the shadows grew long. There was no furniture yet, and the air was still a bit chilly, but as they walked toward the window together, Ethan Liu wasn't just moving his clothes and his books. He was moving into the life he had once thought was impossible. And as the city lights began to sparkle across the water, he knew that this was the most important contract he'd ever sign. The new apartment didn't stay pristine for long. Within the first month, the exposed brick walls were lined with overflowing bookshelves. The kitchen island was perpetually covered in script pages and coffee rings, and a collection of mismatched mugs, half of them stolen from various sets over the years, occupied the front of the cupboard. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that used to feel like a hurdle to get over. Ethan was in the kitchen, squinting at a YouTube tutorial on how to properly decale a high-end espresso machine that Adrian had insisted they needed. I think I've made it worse, Ethan called out, his voice echoing in the high-ceiling space. The little red light is blinking faster now. It looks like it's panicking. Adrian wandered into the room, wearing a pair of sweatpants and one of Ethan's old stunt team hoodies. He looked remarkably unsuperstar-like, his hair messy and a smudge of ink on his thumb from marking up a script. He leaned over Ethan's shoulder, smelling like the cedarwood soap they both used now. Did you try the reset button on the back? Adrian asked, his voice still low with morning sleepiness. There is no reset button, Adrian. There is only a series of complex dial turns that I'm clearly failing at. Adrian chuckled, a soft, grounded sound that vibrated against Ethan's arm. He reached around Ethan, his hand steady, and clicked a small lever into place. The red light stopped blinking and turned a solid, peaceful green. See? You just have to be gentle with it, Adrian teased, leaning in to give Ethan a quick, dry kiss on the cheek. I'm an actor, not a barista, Ethan grumbled, though he was already smiling as he reached for the milk. This was the part of the dream Ethan hadn't written in his notebook. He'd spent 10 years imagining the awards, the leads, and the respect of his peers. He hadn't thought about the quiet joy of discovering that Adrian always folds the laundry while watching documentaries about deep-sea creatures, or the way Adrian's gray eyes brightened when he found Ethan's favorite spicy noodles in the back of the pantry. Living together revealed the little things that no interview could capture. Adrian was surprisingly meticulous about the way the towels were hung, but he could never remember where he put his car keys. Ethan was the one who kept the plants alive and the fridge stocked, but he had a habit of leaving half-finished books face down on every available surface. During a rainy afternoon, Sophia stopped by with a stack of contracts. She took one look at the living room, the laundry drying near the window, the half-organized bookshelf, and the two actors arguing over whether the new rug should be blue or gray, and she let out a long, satisfied sigh. "You guys look normal," Sophia said, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "It's actually a little bit scary." "Is that a professional critique, Sophia?" Ethan asked, handing her a cup of the now perfectly functioning coffee. "It's an observation," she replied, a soft look in her eyes. "I've spent 20 years watching people in this business lose themselves. They get the house, they get the cars, and then they spend all their time trying to figure out who they're supposed to be in them. But you too. You just look like yourselves. Only happier." Later that evening, after Sophia had left and the rain had turned into a soft mist over the harbor, Ethan and Adrian sat at the kitchen island, cleaning up after a simple dinner. There was no television on, no music playing. Just the sound of the dishwasher humming and the distant horn of a ship. Ethan looked at Adrian, who was focused on drying a particularly stubborn pan. "What?" Adrian asked, noticing the gaze. "Nothing," Ethan said, reaching over to take the pan from him. "I was just thinking that this is better than any premiere I've ever been to." Adrian smiled, a real, unguarded expression that Ethan never got tired of seeing. "That's because there are no cameras here, Lou. Just the piece." They finished the chores together, moving around the kitchen with the kind of synchronized rhythm that usually took decades to build. As they eventually turned off the lights and headed toward the bedroom, everyday happiness no longer felt like a distant dream. It was a choice they made every morning, to wait, to listen, and to always come home. The apartment was no longer a new space they were trying to fit into. It had become a living map of their shared history. On the mantelpiece sat a small, chipped ceramic bowl that Adrian had made during a pottery class they'd taken on a whim. Beside it was a framed Polaroid of the crew from The Weight of Salt, everyone looking exhausted but grinning. In the hallway, a large corkboard, a much nicer version of the one Ethan had in his old studio, was covered in photos, ticket stubs, and a hand-drawn map Noah had made to give them directions to his new place. Work remained relentless. Ethan was finishing the post-production for his coastal drama, and Adrian was starting a new series that required long nights in the studio. There were days when they only saw each other for 20 minutes over coffee before the cars arrived to take them to separate sets. But the feeling of those days had changed. Ethan returned home on a Friday night after a 12-hour ADR session. He was mentally fried, his voice raspy from repeating the same emotional lines 50 times. He unlocked the front door and was immediately greeted by the scent of garlic and ginger. The apartment was warm, the yellow lamps casting long, inviting shadows. Adrian was in the kitchen, still wearing his wardrobe trousers from his own set but with a plain t-shirt. He was stirring a pot of soup, looking unusually focused. "You're back late," Adrian said, turning around as Ethan dropped his bag. Director Min wanted to explore the textures of the final monologue, Ethan sighed, walking into the kitchen and resting his forehead against Adrian's shoulder. "I think I've said the word salt more times today than I have in my entire life." Adrian laughed, leaning back to give Ethan some space. "Go wash up. I made the chicken soup Michael taught me how to make last time we visited. It's probably not as good as his, but it's edible." They ate in a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with industry gossip or schedule updates. For years, Ethan had spent his nights in a small, quiet room, replaying his mistakes and planning his next move. Now, his nights were about the person sitting across from him. A few days later, nearly a month after moving in, they finally hosted the small housewarming dinner their schedules had repeatedly forced them to postpone. It wasn't a celebrity event. There were no publicists, no photographers, and no agenda. Just Sophia, Marcus, Noah, and a couple of crew members who had become close friends. Noah arrived first, carrying a massive, hideous houseplant that he insisted was the next big thing in interior design. "It's a prehistoric fern, Ethan," Noah shouted, trying to find a spot for it. "It produces enough oxygen to power a marathon runner." You'll be the most energetic actor in the city. It looks like it's going to try and eat the cat treats. Noah, Ethan joked, though he helped him set it by the window. Marcus and Sophia arrived together, looking remarkably relaxed. Marcus even had a bottle of wine that didn't have a label on it. It's from a small vineyard my cousin owns, Marcus said, handing it to Adrian. No brand ambassadors involved. Just grapes. The evening was a blur of laughter and old stories. They talked about the shipyard lunch, the friendship special disaster, and the time Noah accidentally walked into the wrong trailer and tried to order a sandwich from a very confused director. As the night grew later and the guests eventually started to leave, Noah paused at the door, looking back at the living room. You guys really did it, Noah said, his voice unusually soft. Did what? Adrian asked. You built a real one, Noah said, gesturing to the room. I've seen a lot of industry homes in this town. Most of them feel like sets. This place, it just feels like home. After the door closed and the apartment was quiet again, Ethan and Adrian stood on the balcony, looking out at the water. The city lights were reflecting in the harbor, and a cool breeze was coming off the river. Looking out over the harbor, Ethan finally understood that the most important part of his journey wasn't the breakthrough or the awards. It was this feeling of returning. For 10 years, he had been running toward a dream, running away from a betrayal, running to prove he belonged. He wasn't running anymore. He had found the place he always wanted to be. One more week of night shoots, Adrian said, leaning his head against Ethan's shoulder. Then I'm all yours for a month. I'm counting the days, Star. Ethan smiled. Don't call me that, Adrian murmured. I'm just Adrian here. I know, Ethan said softly, squeezing his hand. That's why I like it. The month off arrived like a gift neither of them quite knew how to open. For the first time in their careers, Ethan and Adrian had 30 days with no call sheets, no wardrobe fittings, and no managers checking their locations. They spent the first week in a state of productive laziness. They slept late, went for long walks in the park, and finally finished organizing the history box in the closet. But as the initial exhaustion faded, the conversations naturally started to shift. They were sitting on the balcony on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The city was bathed in a soft, autumn light, and they were sharing a large pot of tea. I caught myself looking at real estate listings in the northern hills this morning, Adrian said casually, staring at the distant treeline. Ethan looked up from his book. The hills? That's a bit of a commute for the studios. Isn't it? It is. But I was thinking, maybe we don't need to be 10 minutes from stage 4 forever, Adrian said, turning to look at him. I like this apartment, Ethan. I love it. But I was wondering what it would be like to have a garden. A real one, where the air doesn't smell like diesel. Ethan set his book aside, sensing the weight of the conversation. You're thinking about slowing down? Not stopping, Adrian clarified, but maybe being more intentional. I've spent 15 years trying to be everywhere at once. I think I'd like to be in one place for a while. With you. They talked for hours then. Not about the next script or the next award, but about the life they wanted to build over the next 5, 10, 20 years. They talked about traveling to places where they could walk through a market without being recognized. They talked about mentoring young actors. They even briefly, tentatively, talked about what it would be like to have a family. It was the first time their future felt like a shared project rather than a series of individual milestones that happened to overlap. A few days later, they went to dinner with Sophia and Marcus. The atmosphere was light, but as the meal ended, Noah, who had joined them for dessert, couldn't help himself. So, Noah said, leaning forward with a mischievous grin, now that you guys have the apartment, the cat treats, and the matching hoodies, which one of you is going to make the big move? Ethan nearly choked on his tea. The big move. Marriage, Lou. The M word. Noah laughed. The internet is already taking bets. I've got $50 on Adrian doing a dramatic proposal in the middle of a rainstorm. Sophia swatted Noah's arm. Ignore him, Ethan. He's been reading too many fanfiction threads. Marcus, however, didn't laugh. He just quietly sipped his coffee and said, He's not always wrong, Sophia. People are starting to ask. Not in a gossipy way, but in a what's next way. The comment lingered in Ethan's mind long after the dinner ended. As he and Adrian walked back to the car, the silence between them felt different. Not awkward, but charged with a new kind of awareness. That night, Ethan found himself standing by the kitchen wall where their shared calendar was pinned. He looked at the entries. It wasn't just filming dates anymore. There were birthdays marked in red, reminders for family dinners, a note about a weekend trip they were planning. He realized that their future wasn't something they were waiting for. It had already started. The proposal, the wedding, the years ahead, they weren't separate events to be achieved. They were just the natural continuation of the story they were already living. Adrian came up behind him, wrapping his arms around Ethan's waist. "You're staring at the calendar again. Did Marcus add a meeting without telling me?" "No," Ethan said, turning in Adrian's arms. He looked at the man who had changed the gravity of his world. "I was just realizing that I'm not really worried about the future anymore." Adrian smiled, his gray eyes clear and steady. "Neither am I, because no matter what's on that calendar, we're facing it together." Ethan leaned in, resting his forehead against Adrian's. The almost part of his life was officially a memory. He had the career, he had the respect, and he had the home. But as he stood there in the quiet kitchen, Ethan Liu was finally ready for the most important role of all. He was ready for forever. The plan for the proposal didn't involve helicopters, billboards, or a carefully timed flash mob. Ethan had spent a decade watching those kinds of scenes being filmed, and while they looked great on a cinema screen, they felt entirely too loud for the life he and Adrian had built. For Ethan, the truth had always lived in the quiet moments. He'd spent the last 3 weeks coordinating with Sophia and Marcus. It was the first time he'd ever asked them to manipulate a schedule for a personal reason. "I need Thursday evening," Ethan had told Sophia in her office, his voice steady but his hands a bit restless in his pockets. "No late-night ADR, no last-minute script notes. And I need Adrian to be free by 6. Sophia had looked up from her laptop, a slow, knowing grin spreading across her face. "Ethan Liu, are you finally doing what I think you're doing?" "I'm making a choice, Sophia. About time," she'd laughed, already reaching for her phone to call Marcus. "Don't worry. Consider the calendar locked. If a producer calls, I'll tell them you both have a mandatory image maintenance session." The hardest part was Noah. The comedian had a sixth sense for anything resembling a secret. He'd spent 3 days cornering Ethan near the coffee station, narrowing his eyes suspiciously. "You're acting weird, Lou," Noah had whispered. "You're too calm. It's the kind of calm people have before they jump out of a plane." "What are you hiding?" "I'm just well-rested, Noah. Try it sometime," Ethan had replied, dodging the question with a practiced ease. Thursday arrived with a clear, indigo sky. The workday had been unusually smooth, almost as if the industry itself was giving them a break. Ethan picked up a simple dinner on the way home, his heart doing a slow, heavy thud against his ribs every time he felt the small velvet box tucked into his inner jacket pocket. They ate on the floor of the living room, leaning against the sofa, just like they had 100 times before. They talked about a funny interaction Adrian had with a rookie actor that morning and the fact that they were finally out of laundry detergent. It was perfect because it was ordinary. "Come out onto the balcony for a minute," Ethan said as they finished cleaning up. "The air is actually warm tonight." Adrian followed him out, leaning his elbows on the railing and looking out at the lights reflecting in the harbor. "I could get used to this," Adrian sighed, "not having to check the weather for a morning shoot. Just looking at the view because it's there." Ethan stood beside him, watching the profile of the man who had become his entire world. He thought about the lobby of Victoria Tower, the shipyard lunch, the midnight calls across time zones, and the way Adrian's hand always felt like home. "Do you remember?" Ethan began, his voice a bit low, "when we sat on that rooftop after Shadowline, and we wondered what our future would look like?" Adrian turned to look at him, his gray eyes softening. "I remember. I think I was terrified you were going to tell me you were moving back to the coast." "I was never going anywhere, Adrian," Ethan smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small ring. It wasn't flashy. A simple, solid band of dark metal with a small, raw stone embedded in the side. "I realized that the future wasn't a place we were going. It was just wherever you were standing." He took a steady breath, the world around them seeming to go silent. I don't want to imagine a single take without you next to me. Adrian, will you marry me? Adrian froze. For a long, heart-stopping second, he didn't even breathe. He looked at the ring, then back at Ethan, his expression a mixture of shock and a deep, overwhelming joy. Tears gathered in his eyes, making them sparkle under the balcony lights. He let out a short, shaky laugh. Ethan, I thought I was going to have to be the one to ask. I've had a ring hidden in the history box for 2 months. Ethan blinked, stunned. You have? I was waiting for the right time, Adrian whispered, stepping into Ethan's space and resting his hands on Ethan's chest. But your version is much better. Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times, yes. There were no cameras, no audience, no directors shouting for more emotion. It was just 2 men on a balcony in a quiet part of the city, holding onto each other like they were the only 2 people left on Earth. As they eventually went back inside, the engagement ring catching the soft light of the kitchen, it became clear to Ethan that the most important promise he'd ever make didn't need a screenplay. It was written in the silence they shared, and for the first time in his life, Ethan Lu knew that the word, forever, wasn't a dream anymore. It was his reality. The wedding morning arrived with a quiet, dignified grace. There was no frantic rushing, no shouting stylists, and no PR teams managing the guest list. Following their own rules, Ethan and Adrian had kept the ceremony small, just family and the handful of people who had been there before the awards and the headlines. Ethan stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom of their apartment, adjusting the lapels of his suit. It was a tailored charcoal piece, simple and solid. He felt a strange sense of calm, the kind he usually reserved for a high-stakes stunt, but this time it was layered with a deep, grounded warmth. A knock came at the door. Sophia walked in, wearing a soft lavender dress that made her look less like a sharp agent and more like a proud older sister. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes welling up instantly. Don't you dare start crying, Sophia, Ethan warned, though his own voice was a bit thick. We have a schedule to keep. I'm the agent, Ethan. I set the schedule, she sniffled, walking over to fix his tie for the 1,000th time. You look like the man I knew you could be 10 years ago. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Sophia, for everything, for not letting me stay a shadow. Across the hallway, in the spare room they used as a study, Marcus was performing a similar ritual with Adrian. The car is downstairs. The security at the venue has confirmed 0 unauthorized cameras, Marcus said, his voice as professional as ever, though he was carefully smoothing a wrinkle on Adrian's shoulder. He paused, looking at the superstar he'd managed through a decade of chaos. You're sure about the vows, Adrian? No professional writers involved. I wrote them myself, Marcus. Ethan would know in a heartbeat if I didn't. Marcus nodded, a small, rare smile touching his lips. Good. Then let's go. You've kept him waiting long enough. The ceremony was held in a small, renovated greenhouse on the edge of the city. The glass walls were covered in climbing vines, and the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating a dappled, golden light that felt more beautiful than any studio rig. There were only 20 chairs. Ethan's parents sat in the front row, Michael Liu looking uncharacteristically emotional as he watched his son take his place at the front. A few seats away, Mason sat with an unmistakable grin, looking every bit as proud as he had the day Ethan landed his role in Shadowline a few years ago. Through every setback, breakthrough, and headline that followed, he'd remained one of Ethan's closest friends. Adrian's parents were beside them, Claire Shun holding a lace handkerchief and Victor Shin nodding with a look of quiet approval. When Adrian walked down the short aisle, the room seemed to hold its breath. He wasn't the global icon in that moment. He was just a man walking toward the person who understood him. The ceremony was brief and honest. They didn't make grand, poetic speeches about destiny. They spoke about the shipyard. They spoke about the coffee runs. They spoke about the way they had learned to trust each other's silence. I can't promise that every day will be a hit, Ethan said, his voice steady as he looked directly into Adrian's eyes. But I can promise that I'll always be there to catch you when the mark is hard to find. I choose you today, and I'll choose you every morning when the alarm goes off." Adrian smiled, his hand trembling slightly as he placed the ring on Ethan's finger. "I spent a long time looking for a role that felt real, Ethan. I didn't realize that I just needed to find the right partner. I'm home whenever I'm with you. I love you." When they were finally declared husbands, the applause wasn't the roar of a stadium. It was the warm, intimate sound of people who genuinely loved them. Noah was the loudest, of course, cheering and wiping his eyes with his sleeve while Sophia laughed beside him. The reception was a relaxed dinner at a long wooden table. There was no stage, no microphones, and no hierarchy. They shared a meal, laughed about old filming disasters, and listened to Noah's heartfelt and embarrassing speech, which involved a detailed list of every time he'd almost caught them before the reveal. "To the duo," Noah shouted, raising his glass. "May your takes be short and your lives be long." As the sun set and the guests eventually began to head home, the greenhouse grew quiet. Ethan and Adrian stayed behind for a few minutes, standing in the middle of the empty space. The scent of jasmine and damp earth was heavy in the air. Ethan looked at Adrian, feeling the weight of the new ring on his finger. Felt solid. Felt permanent. "Good night, husband," Ethan said softly, the word tasting wonderful in his mouth. Adrian laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that echoed against the glass walls. He leaned in, resting his forehead against Ethan's. "Good night, husband," Adrian replied. They walked out of the greenhouse together, hand in hand, heading toward the car. The biggest milestones were now behind them, the breakthrough, the reveal, the wedding. But as Ethan looked at the road ahead, he knew that the best part wasn't the ceremony they just finished. It was the lifetime of ordinary, quiet days that were finally about to begin. The location for the honeymoon was a small, sun-drenched villa on a quiet island that Adrian had discovered years ago while filming a travel commercial. It wasn't the kind of place you'd find in a luxury brochure. It was rugged, accessible only by a single ferry a day, and the only attraction was a long, crescent-shaped beach where the water was so clear you could see the shadows of the small fish darting over the sand. For the first time in their lives, there was no one to answer to. No Sophia calling about a brand renewal, no Marcus checking in on a flight schedule, and certainly no Noah popping in to steal leftovers. "I think I've forgotten how to just be," Adrian said on their third morning. They were sitting on a wide wooden porch, their feet propped up on the railing. Between them sat a bowl of local fruit and a half-empty pot of coffee. Ethan leaned back, squinting at the sunlight hitting the waves. "It's a skill, Adrian, like anything else. Give it another 2 days and you'll be an expert at doing absolutely nothing." "I don't know," Adrian smiled, reaching out to hook his thumb through the loop of Ethan's coffee mug. "I keep expecting Marcus to walk around the corner and tell me I have a wardrobe fitting in 10 minutes. Well, if he does, I'll tell him he's trespassing," Ethan joked. The days fell into a slow, rhythmic pattern. They walked along the shore, collecting smooth stones and pieces of sea glass. They ate at a tiny local taverna where the owner only spoke enough English to tell them the catch of the day. They talked about things they'd never had time for. Not scripts or industry gossip, but the books they'd read as children, their favorite smells, and what they wanted their lives to look like when they were old and gray. As the sun began to set on their 5th evening, turning the sky a deep, bruised purple, the conversation naturally drifted toward a vulnerability neither had explored before. They were back on the porch, the air cooling as the ocean breeze picked up. They were both successful and respected, but as they sat there in the silence, Ethan realized that they were both stepping into a script they had never rehearsed. "I'm a bit nervous," Adrian said softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't need to specify what he meant. The honesty they had built over the years allowed them to speak in shorthand. Ethan shifted, reaching for Adrian's hand. He felt the same flutter of uncertainty in his own chest. "Me too. I spent 10 years learning how to take a hit or fall from a building, Adrian. I never really learned how to be this close to someone. I've never wanted to, until you. I was always too busy being the perfect gentleman for the cameras," Adrian sighed, turning to look at Ethan. "I didn't have room for a real life. I think I'm a bit of a late bloomer." Ethan let out a quiet, reassuring laugh. Then we're in the same boat. No experts here, Star. They talked then with a level of openness that was raw and grounded. There were no assumptions about roles or expectations. They didn't talk about what they were supposed to do because they were married. They talked about what made them feel safe. I like it when you lead, Adrian admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I've had to be the center of attention for so long, Ethan. I've had to make all the choices, manage all the people. With you, I just want to trust you. I want to know I don't have to carry the weight. Ethan squeezed his hand, a surge of protective warmth filling his chest. I can do that. I've been catching people for a long time, Adrian. But I want to make sure you're always comfortable. If you aren't, you tell me. No acting. No performances. Never with you, Adrian promised. That night, in the quiet of the villa, they shared a new kind of intimacy. It wasn't the frantic, high-octane passion of a cinema screen. It was slow, tentative, and filled with a deep, quiet respect. There was awkward laughter when a movement didn't quite work, nervous smiles in the dark, and a constant, soft stream of "Are you okay?" and "Is this all right?" It was a conversation without words, built on the foundation of the 3 years they had spent learning to understand each other's silence. By morning, the sun was pale and soft on the walls of the bedroom. Ethan woke up first, watching the way the light hit Adrian's face. The superstar was gone, replaced by the man who had finally found his home. Adrian stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He spotted Ethan and a slow, sleepy smile touched his lips. He didn't look different, but the air between them felt quieter. The final wall had been taken down. "Good morning," Adrian murmured, reaching out to rest his hand on Ethan's chest. "Morning, husband," Ethan replied. The honeymoon eventually ended, and they packed their bags to head back to the city. But as they stood on the ferry, watching the island fade into the distance, Ethan realized that the intimacy hadn't just been a milestone. It was another layer of the trust they carried with them. They were returning to the noise and the cameras, but they were returning even closer than they had been before. The excitement of the wedding and the quiet peace of the honeymoon had settled into a steady, warm glow. Returning to the shipyard apartment didn't feel like the end of a vacation. It felt like the beginning of the real work. Ethan stood in the kitchen on a Monday morning, watching the sunlight hit the wedding gift boxes that were still stacked in the corner. He glanced down at his left hand, his thumb unconsciously rubbing the dark metal band on his finger. Husband, he thought. The word still felt like a new script he was learning, one that he actually enjoyed reciting. He heard the soft scuff of slippers behind him. Adrian appeared, wearing a pair of flannel pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair looking like a chaotic art project. He stopped by the counter, blinking at the coffee pot. "Is it Monday?" Adrian asked, his voice a morning rasp. "It is," Ethan smiled, handing him a mug. "The agency opens in 2 hours. Sophia messaged me already. She wants to discuss the transition into the next quarter." Adrian groaned, leaning his forehead against Ethan's shoulder. "I forgot we had a life that didn't involve collecting sea glass and eating olives for dinner." "It's okay. We've got reinforcements coming over later," Ethan said, checking his watch. "Noah and the managers are stopping by for an early dinner. Marcus said he has finalized the post-wedding logistics." "Of course he did," Adrian laughed. The day was filled with the small, domestic chores of a newly married life. They finally tackled the mountain of wedding gifts, unpacking boxes of high-end kitchenware, luxurious blankets, and a particularly strange-looking piece of modern art from Noah that seemed to be a series of interconnected glass bubbles. "I think it's a vase," Ethan said, turning it over in his hands. "I think it's a warning," Adrian countered. They spent the afternoon organizing their shared life. For years they had been a duo, but now they were a household. They combined their libraries, argued over where the TV should go, and Ethan finally convinced Adrian that they didn't need 4 different types of specialized espresso spoons. That evening, the apartment was filled with the familiar, loud energy of their inner circle. Sophia arrived first, looking more like an older sister than an agent, immediately heading to the kitchen to help Ethan with the prep. The wedding photos are incredible, by the way, Sophia said, showing Ethan a digital gallery on her phone. The one of you two leaving the greenhouse. I think it's the most honest shot I've ever seen of an actor. It wasn't an act, Sophia, Ethan reminded her with a wink. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, looking as stern as ever, though he was carrying a large box of expensive chocolates. He set it on the island and gave Adrian a firm nod. You look well-rested, Adrian. I expect that to translate into your performance for the series next week. Nice to see you too, Marcus, Adrian joked. Noah burst in last, empty-handed as usual, but immediately heading for the snack bowl. Husbands, look at you. You look so legal. Can I see the rings? Do they glow in the dark? Please tell me you got the ones that glow. They're metal, Noah, not glow sticks. Ethan laughed. The dinner was a relaxed, joyful affair. There were no speeches, no cameras, and no formal congratulations. It was just a group of friends who had become a family over the course of a long, difficult journey. They talked about the wedding, laughed at Noah's stories from the sabbatical. He'd been forced into by Sophia after he tried to crash the honeymoon, and ate until they couldn't move. As the guests eventually began to head home, Marcus paused at the door. He looked at the two of them, standing together in the center of their home, looking happy and whole. I've spent 10 years making sure Adrian didn't lose his mind in this business, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a rare, sincere tone. I'm glad I can finally hand that job over to someone who knows what they're doing. Ethan shook his hand. I've got him, Marcus. Don't worry. After the door closed and the apartment was finally quiet again, Ethan and Adrian stood in the living room. The lights of the city were sparkling outside the window, but the inside of the home was warm and still. Ethan began the ritual of the night, locking the front door, checking the windows, and switching off the lights. He paused by the kitchen counter, looking at a framed photo from their first project together. They looked so young there, so guarded and uncertain. Adrian came up behind him, resting his chin on Ethan's shoulder. What are you looking at? Just the start of the movie, Ethan whispered. Adrian leaned in, his gray eyes clear and steady. Well, I like the sequel much better. They headed toward the bedroom together, their footsteps in sync. The big milestones were over, and the world was still waiting for them outside the door. But as Ethan Liu closed his eyes that night, he realized that the dream wasn't about the spotlight or the applause. It was about the quiet, ordinary certainty of being known. A new chapter had officially begun. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Liu didn't need a script to know exactly what came next. The light in the soundstage was different than it used to be. It wasn't just the newer, quieter LED rigs or the high-definition monitors that looked more like windows than screens. It was the way Ethan felt when he walked under them. Nearly 4 years had passed since the morning he and Adrian had sat on equipment crates, sharing coffee before their first 3-month split. Since then, the world had gotten bigger, but their lives had gotten quieter. Ethan was 30 now. He looked much the same, broad shoulders, messy black hair, and that steady, observant gaze. But there was a new kind of weight in the way he moved. He didn't look like a man trying to prove he belonged anymore. He looked like the person everyone else was waiting for. He was currently on the set of a large-scale drama. He arrived at 5 a.m., out of a decade-long habit, and found himself standing by the coffee station. You're making the rest of the cast look lazy, Ethan, a voice teased. Ethan turned to see Sophia walking over, holding her own mug. She looked exactly the same, though she'd traded her sharp trench coats for softer, comfortable knit sweaters. She was no longer just his agent. She was one of the directors of her own agency now, managing a dozen rising stars. But Ethan was still her priority. I like the quiet, Sophia. You know that, Ethan said, handing her a stirrer. I know, but look over there. She gestured toward a group of 4 young actors standing near the wardrobe trailer. They were all in their early 20s, looking jittery and clutching their scripts like life rafts. The moment they spotted Ethan, they all straightened their backs, and one of them actually dropped his highlighter. They've been talking about you for an hour, Sophia whispered. Apparently, working with Ethan Liu is the top item on their career bucket lists. Ethan felt a strange, nostalgic prickle in his chest. He remembered being that kid, the one who stood in the shadows of Victoria Tower, hoping someone would just look at him for 5 seconds. One of the boys, a nervous-looking kid with bright eyes, eventually worked up the courage to walk over. He bowed so low his forehead nearly hit the table. "Mr. Liu, it's an honor to work with you. I've watched the warehouse fight in Beyond the Edge about 50 times. I actually went to a stunt workshop because of you." Ethan smiled, reaching out to steady the boy's shoulder. "Ethan is fine, and I hope the workshop was easier on your knees than it was on mine. Welcome to the team." The boy looked like he'd just won the lottery. He thanked Ethan 3 more times before scurrying back to his group. That evening, back at the shipyard apartment, Ethan was telling Adrian about the encounter while they prepped dinner. Adrian was 31 now, and he had become much more selective about his work. He'd recently finished a successful run in a stage play and was now preparing to produce his first independent film. He was currently sitting at the island, meticulously peeling an orange. "I sounded just like Marcus today," Ethan laughed, setting a plate of stir-fry on the table. "I caught myself giving a lecture on pacing to a kid who was trying too hard to look cool for the camera." Adrian smiled, handing Ethan a slice of the orange. "It was only a matter of time. You've been a teacher since the day I met you, Lou. You just finally have the title to go with it." "It feels weird," Ethan admitted, sitting down. "I still feel like the guy who's just lucky to have a speaking role. I look at those kids and I want to tell them that the awards don't matter as much as the people you meet along the way. They'll learn," Adrian said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze Ethan's hand. "Just like we did. But I think they're lucky. They have you to look at. They don't have to guess what a real actor looks like." Ethan looked around their home, the books, the photos, the life they had built. The industry was different now, and so were they. Fame was no longer the destination. It was just the background noise to the life they chose to lead when the cameras were off. "New beginnings, huh?" Ethan asked. "Every day," Adrian replied. The day ended with the two of them finishing dinner in the quiet of their kitchen. The world outside was still calling their names, and the next project was always just a phone call away. But as they shared a final piece of fruit, Ethan Liu understood that the most important role he'd ever taken on wasn't one written in a script. It was the one he was playing right now, a mentor, a partner, and a man who finally knew what it meant to be home. The first week of filming for the new drama became a masterclass in quiet leadership. It wasn't something Ethan or Adrian had planned, but after years of working together, their influence on a set had become almost gravitational. Ethan noticed it most during the rehearsals. The younger actors were talented, technically proficient, good with their lines, but they were all performing for an imaginary audience. They were focused on the impact of their scenes rather than the honesty of them. During a break on Wednesday, Ethan found a young actress named Maya sitting alone behind a lighting baffle. She was playing a key supporting role, but she looked like she was on the verge of a breakdown. "The director says I'm being too polished," Maya whispered, not looking up from her lap. "He says I look like a commercial. I don't know how to look. Not polished. I spent 3 years in school learning how to look perfect." Ethan pulled over a crate and sat down. He didn't offer a motivational speech. He just reached into his bag and pulled out his old, worn-out acting notebook, the one he'd carried since the beginning of his trainee days. "Look at the first page," Ethan said, handing it to her. Maya opened it, her eyes widening as she saw the messy handwriting and the dozens of rejected notes scribbled in the margins. "I spent 10 years being invisible, Maya," Ethan said gently. "And for the first 8 of those years, I thought the problem was that I wasn't perfect enough. I thought I needed better hair, or a louder voice, or a more marketable face." He pointed to a note at the bottom of a page from 5 years ago. "Don't act the emotion. Live the consequence. The polish is what you use when you're afraid the truth isn't enough," Ethan explained. "But the audience doesn't want the polish. They want to see someone who's as messy and uncertain as they are. You don't need to be a star in this scene. You just need to be a girl who's lost her way. Forget the cameras. Just look at the person in front of you." Maya stared at the notebook for a long time. When she finally looked up, the panic in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, thoughtful focus. Just the person in front of me. Okay, I can try that. Adrian was mentoring in a different way. He didn't use notebooks or stories. He used his presence. He was the one who made sure the crew felt seen. He'd spend his breaks talking to the catering staff about their families, or helping a junior grip move a heavy sandbag without making a scene of it. He was showing the newcomers that being at the top didn't mean you were above the work. During a Friday lunch break, the catering tent was filled with the usual buzz. For the first time, the younger cast members didn't retreat to their own tables. They naturally gathered around Ethan and Adrian, drawn in by the easy, casual atmosphere the duo created. Even Noah Chen had made an appearance, ostensibly to visit his old friends, but really to see the new set. "I'm telling you, kids," Noah said, gesturing with a chicken wing toward Ethan and Adrian. "By the time I met these two, they were already inseparable. You rarely saw one without the other, and if they weren't filming, they were probably arguing about a scene." "We weren't that bad, Noah," Adrian joked, leaning his head on Ethan's shoulder. "You were worse," Noah laughed. "But look at you now. The seniors. The legends." "I saw a rookie actor in the hallway earlier who looked like he was going to ask Ethan for a blessing." The table erupted into laughter, the younger actors joining in. The tension that usually plagued a high-budget set had evaporated, replaced by a sense of genuine camaraderie. As the lunch ended and everyone headed back to their marks, Ethan stayed back for a second, watching the younger cast members talking and laughing among themselves. They were supportive of each other, checking each other's costumes and running lines in hushed, encouraging tones. "They're going to do well," Adrian said, coming up beside him. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, a sense of profound peace washing over him. "I think the industry is in good hands." He understood then that he wasn't going to be remembered for the awards on his shelf or the box office numbers of his films. He was going to be remembered for this, the culture of kindness and honesty that he and Adrian had quietly helped to build. As they walked back onto the set together, Ethan Liu realized that he didn't need to worry about being forgotten. Because every time one of these young actors chose truth over polish, a part of his story was being told all over again. The future wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise. And as the director called for places, Ethan knew that he was ready for the next take. The night shoot for the new drama was proving to be a test of endurance for everyone involved. A cold, drizzling rain was falling. This time it wasn't a rain machine, but an actual storm blowing in from the coast. The soundstage felt like a hollow cave, the air damp and smelling of wet wool and overheated electronics. Ethan was standing by the monitors, wrapped in a heavy production parka, watching a scene unfold on the screen. Across the set, a young actor named Kai was struggling. He was supposed to be delivering a pivotal confession, but his voice was shaking from more than just the cold. He had missed his mark twice, and the director's patience was visibly thinning. "Kai, look at me," the assistant director shouted through a megaphone. "You're losing the light. We need the emotion now, not in 20 minutes. Just get it done." Ethan saw Kai flinch. He saw the way the boy's hands gripped his jacket, his knuckles white. It was a look Ethan knew intimately. It was the look of a person who felt like they were drowning in a room full of people who were only interested in the tide. Sophia walked up beside Ethan, handing him a warm bottle of water. She followed his gaze toward the trembling rookie. "He's hitting a wall," she noted quietly. "Reminds me of a certain stunt double who used to stand in the lobby of Victoria Tower for 6 hours a day." Ethan smiled faintly, though his eyes remained on Kai. "He looks like he's waiting for the floor to open up and swallow him." "Well, he's not going to find his character if he's that terrified of the crew," Sophia said, her voice full of a rare, maternal concern. "Somebody needs to throw him a life jacket." Ethan didn't say anything. He just handed the water back to Sophia and started walking across the set. He moved past the cables and the lighting stands, his footsteps silent on the damp floor. When he reached Kai, the boy looked up, his eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. "Mr. Liu, I'm sorry. I'll get it on the next one, I promise." Stop, Ethan said, his voice quiet but steadying. Take a breath, Kai. Forget the director. Forget the crew. Forget the megaphone. Ethan sat down on a nearby equipment crate and gestured for Kai to do the same. The boy hesitated before sinking onto a stack of folded mats. Do you know what I was doing when I was your age? Ethan asked, leaning forward. Filming Shadow Line? Kai guessed, his voice small. No, Ethan laughed softly. I was a nameless guard in a mid-budget thriller. I had 3 lines, and I spent 4 hours in a cold hallway waiting for a lead actor who didn't even know my name to finish his lunch. I was so nervous I forgot how to breathe. I thought if I messed up those 3 lines, my entire life was over. Kai looked at him, surprised. You? But you're Ethan Liu. I am now, Ethan said. But back then, I was just a guy who was afraid he wasn't enough. And do you know why I made it through that day? Because someone I hadn't even met properly yet, told me that I didn't need to be a star. I just needed to be truthful. Ethan reached out and rested a hand on Kai's shoulder. The boy was still shivering, but the panic in his eyes was starting to recede. Acting isn't about being perfect for the camera, Kai, Ethan said. It's about being honest with yourself. This character you're playing, he's not a hero. He's a person who's lost something. Use that cold you're feeling. Use that exhaustion. Don't fight it. Let it tell the story for you. He stood up, offering Kai a hand. You don't have to become a legend tonight. Just become a little better than you were 10 minutes ago. I'll be right here watching the monitor. If you fall, I'll catch the take. Okay? Kai took his hand, his grip finally firm. Okay. Thank you, Ethan. The next take was the one they kept. Kai delivered the lines with a raw, hollow sincerity that made the soundstage go silent. There was no polish, no performance, just a human being sharing a truth. When the director shouted, "Cut! Print that!" the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. Adrian was waiting for Ethan back at the monitors. He had arrived early for his own scene, and he'd been watching the entire exchange from the shadows. You sounded just like Sophia there, Lou, Adrian teased, though his eyes were full of a deep, quiet pride. Giving the life jacket speech. I was just telling him what I wish someone had told me 10 years ago, Ethan said, leaning his head against Adrian's shoulder for a second. Adrian smiled, wrapping an arm around Ethan's waist. You've become exactly the person you needed back then, Ethan. I think Marcus and Sophia are finally starting to realize their jobs are in danger. Ethan laughed, the sound easy and warm despite the cold rain outside. He realized then that the success he had once chased had nothing to do with the awards or the leads. It was the ability to pass on the kindness that had been given to him. As they walked toward the set for their shared scene, Ethan Liu's journey was no longer just about reaching the light. It had become about passing it on. Beside his husband, beneath the familiar studio lights, he took his mark with a quiet smile. He was exactly where he was meant to be. A new year arrived, and with it came the announcement of a project the industry had been whispering about for months. It was a joint production between director Min and Benjamin Kong, a sprawling historical epic titled The Final Script. For Ethan and Adrian, it was their first major collaboration in nearly 3 years. The first day on set felt like a mirror of the early parts of their story, but the reflection had been polished by time. They arrived together in the same car, no longer needing separate entrances or the strategic gaps Marcus and Sophia used to worry about. As they walked through the studio gates, the air was humming with the familiar energy of a big production. But today, the silence that followed them wasn't out of skepticism or confusion. It was out of respect. Look at them, Ethan heard a junior grip whisper to his partner. The duo. I heard they've been sharing the same script notes since the table read. They don't even need a director anymore, the other replied. They just look at each other and the scene is done. Ethan smiled to himself, adjusting the strap of his bag. He thought back to the first day of Beyond the Edge, when he had walked onto the set wondering if he deserved to be there. Today, the only thing he was wondering was whether Adrian had remembered to pack his favorite tea. They found their chairs in a quiet corner of the soundstage. The nameplates were side by side, Ethan Liu and Adrian Shin. It feels like we never left, Adrian noted, sitting down and opening his binder. He looked remarkably relaxed, his gray eyes clear and steady. He was no longer the lonely superstar Ethan had met in the Victoria Tower lobby. He was a man who knew exactly who he was and who he belonged to. "We've just got better chairs now," Ethan joked, leaning back. The morning was a blur of familiar rituals. The costume fittings, the lighting checks, the hushed conversations with the director. But beneath the professional routine was a deep, underlying sense of peace. They worked as a unit, instinctively anticipating each other's needs. When Adrian's collar was crooked, Ethan fixed it before the stylist could reach him. When Ethan's voice grew raspy, Adrian was already holding out a cup of warm water. During a break between scenes, they sat together on the edge of a reconstructed palace balcony, watching the crew reset the massive camera crane. "Do you ever think about the shipyard?" Adrian asked suddenly, looking out at the fake horizon. Ethan nodded. "Every day, especially when the coffee on set is this bad." Adrian laughed. "I was thinking about the silence. Remember how much we used to hide? How we were so afraid that if we said the wrong word, the whole world would fall apart." "I remember," Ethan said softly. He reached out and took Adrian's hand, their rings catching the artificial moonlight of the rig. "I'm glad we stopped hiding, Adrian. The world didn't fall apart. It just got a lot more honest." "It did," Adrian agreed, squeezing Ethan's hand. The director called them back for the final take of the afternoon. It was a long, emotional sequence, a goodbye between two characters who knew they might never see each other again. As they performed the scene, the rest of the soundstage seemed to disappear. There were no cameras, no lighting techs, and no directors. There was only the person standing across from them. Ethan drew from a well of truth that was deeper than any screenplay, and Adrian met him beat for beat, his gray eyes reflecting a trust that had been forged over a decade of shared takes. When the scene ended, the set remained silent for a long time. It was the same silence Ethan had experienced on the day of his breakthrough, the silence of a truth being told. As they walked back to the car that evening, the sun was setting over the studio lot, turning the soundstages into islands of gold. Ethan looked at Adrian, noticing the way the light hit his jaw and the quiet, unshakable peace in his expression. "Same time tomorrow?" Ethan asked as he unlocked the car. Adrian smiled, a real, radiant smile that was meant only for his partner. "Every day, Lou. For as many takes as it takes." Ethan pulled onto the highway, heading home. The road ahead was long, and the industry was still as chaotic as ever. But the movie had ended. Life hadn't. Beside him sat the person he wanted to share every new beginning with. And as long as they were together, every first day would always be the start of another story. For the first time in what felt like an age, the shared calendar on the kitchen wall was completely blank. No filming locations, no urgent red-inked reminders from Sophia, no flight itineraries from Marcus. It was a Saturday, and for Ethan and Adrian, it was a day of absolute, radical nothingness. The apartment was bathed in the soft, low-hanging light of a late autumn afternoon. The city outside was humming with its usual frantic energy, but inside, the air was still, smelling of the cinnamon tea Adrian had brewed an hour ago. Ethan was sitting on the floor in the living room, leaning against the base of the sofa. He was supposed to be tidying up a stack of old magazines, but he'd gotten distracted by a small cardboard box he'd found tucked behind the books. "Adrian, look at this," Ethan called out. Adrian wandered in from the study, a pair of reading glasses perched on his head and a worn-out sweatshirt hanging off his shoulders. He sat down on the rug beside Ethan, peering into the box. Ethan pulled out a faded, crinkled movie ticket. "The first movie we saw together. Remember? You made me sit through a 3-hour black-and-white documentary about bridge architecture just because you didn't want to go to a crowded theater." Adrian laughed, taking the ticket from him. "I remember. I spent half the time watching you instead of the screen. You looked so serious, taking notes on the pacing of a documentary about rivets." They spent the next hour going through the box, the physical residue of a journey that had spanned a decade. There was a souvenir keychain from Prague, a dried flower from the greenhouse wedding, and even a small hand-drawn map Ethan had used during his very first stunt on Silent City. "It's weird," Ethan said, leaning his head back against the cushions. "Back then, I thought home was just the place where I slept between rejections. I didn't think it could be a place where I actually kept things, where I felt safe." Adrian reached over, intertwining his fingers with Ethan's. The rings they had worn for years were scuffed now, small marks of a life lived, not just displayed. "I spent 10 years living in 5-star hotels, Lou. I had everything I could buy, but I didn't own a single thing that mattered until I met you. This apartment, the books, the tea, the arguments about the espresso machine. This is the only award I actually care about." His phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a video call request from Noah. Ethan hit the accept button, and Noah's face appeared, looking typically chaotic. He was wearing a tropical shirt and was currently standing in what looked like a crowded airport. "Husbands, are you missing me yet?" Noah shouted over the background noise. "I'm in Singapore for a guest spot. I just saw a billboard of you two for the winter thriller. You both look very intense and very expensive. We're currently sitting on the floor in our pajamas." "Noah," Ethan joked, "the intensity is on a break today." "Well, enjoy the break. I'm coming over next week to demand a home-cooked meal. And tell Marcus I'm not answering his emails about the variety show. Vacation mode is on." As Noah hung up, a notification popped up from Marcus. It was a photo of a quiet beach, accompanied by a rare, single sentence. "The world is still turning without us. See you Monday." Ethan smiled, setting the phone aside. He looked at Adrian, who was now leaning against his shoulder, watching the sun begin to set over the harbor. They sat there for a long time, watching the sky turn from gold to a deep, bruised violet. They didn't talk about the industry or the next project. They didn't talk about the legacy they were leaving behind. They just existed in the quiet, ordinary space they had built. Home wasn't a destination Ethan had reached. It was the person who walked through the door with him every evening. It was the silence they shared, the laughter they never had to script, and the life they had built together, one ordinary day at a time. As the city lights began to flicker across the water, Ethan glanced at Adrian and smiled. Tomorrow would bring another first day. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. The premiere of the final script was the biggest event of the winter season. The Grand Cinema was once again transformed into a palace of light and velvet. But for Ethan, the atmosphere no longer felt overwhelming. He stood in the wings of the stage, watching the crowd through a gap in the curtain. The phoenixes were there in force, their signs now professionally printed and glowing with LED lights. The reporters were still shouting, the cameras were still flashing, and the pressure of the industry was still a palpable weight in the air. But it no longer felt like a threat. It was just a part of the job. "Ready, Lou?" Ethan turned to see Adrian standing beside him. The perfect gentleman was in top form tonight, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look like a modern-day king. But as he reached out to straighten Ethan's tie, his eyes were full of a quiet, personal warmth that had nothing to do with the cameras. "Ready?" Ethan said, offering a small, grounded smile. They walked out onto the stage together. The roar of the applause was deafening, a wave of sound that seemed to vibrate in the very center of Ethan's chest. They stood in the spotlight, side by side, answering questions with the same effortless rhythm they'd shared for years. After the formal presentation, as the crowd began to filter into the theater, a young actor approached them. He was maybe 21, looking sharp but clearly overwhelmed by the scale of the evening. "Mr. Liu, Mr. Shen, I just wanted to say thank you," the boy said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm a trainee at Victoria. I spent 2 years thinking I had to hide who I was if I wanted to succeed. But watching you two, seeing how you've stayed true to yourselves and each other, it gave me the courage to stay. I think I can be a real actor now." Ethan looked at the boy, seeing the reflection of his younger self in those nervous eyes. He reached out and gave the boy's arm a firm, supportive squeeze. "The industry will always try to tell you who to be, kid," Ethan said gently. But the only role that actually matters is the one you play when the cameras are off. Keep your heart honest. The rest will follow. Adrian added with a wink. And don't forget to eat breakfast. It's hard to be a legend on an empty stomach. As the boy thanked them and scurried off, Ethan felt a profound sense of completion. He realized then that living the dream wasn't about the awards on his mantelpiece or the fact that his name was now a household word. It was about this: the ability to tell stories that mattered, the chance to guide the ones coming up behind him, and the certainty of the hand holding his. The drive home that night was quiet. They had skipped the flashy after-party, opting instead for a late-night drive through the city. Ethan was at the wheel, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Tired?" Adrian asked from the passenger seat. "A little," Ethan admitted. "But it's a good kind of tired." They arrived home shortly after midnight. The soundstage makeup was washed away, the expensive suits were hung up in the closet, and the duo was officially off duty. Ethan unlocked the front door and Adrian stepped inside, switching on the warm yellow lamps of the living room. It was the same routine they'd shared for years. The coffee pot was prepared for the morning, the windows were checked, and the silence of the apartment was a familiar, welcoming friend. Adrian stood by the bedroom door, looking back at Ethan. "Long day." Ethan smiled, walking over and wrapping his arms around his husband. "A good one." That night, as Ethan lay in the dark, listening to the steady breathing of the person beside him, his thoughts drifted back to where it had all begun. He'd spent so long waiting for the truth, waiting for a chance, waiting to be seen. He realized now that the spotlight was never the goal. The goal was the person who understood the shadow. Some stories begin with a bang, Ethan thought as he felt himself drifting off to sleep. Ours began with 1,000 quiet choices. And the best part? We're still choosing each other every single day. The city was still alive outside the window. Somewhere, a nameless guard was waiting in a cold hallway. Somewhere, a rookie was nervously preparing for their first take. Somewhere, a shadow was hoping to be seen. Ethan Liu quietly hoped they would find their way. Then he turned away from the window and closed his eyes. The lights were out, the cameras were off, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have to dream about the future. He was already living it. The end. Remember, the greatest stories aren't always written in grand moments. They're built through the quiet choices we make every day. Thank you so much for joining Ethan and Adrian's journey here on the Fiction Verse. Every single story on this channel is written and created entirely by me, and your support truly means the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like, share it with someone who might love it too, and subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss the next story in the verse. Until next time, stay cozy and take care.